Live.
Good afternoon. This is the meeting of the AIB. Today's date is February the 20th, 2025. I assume that all of our members are here. Let me basically take a quick roll and see who is here, Madam Executive Secretary, Executive Director. Sorry.
Yes, we have all members present.
Why don't you go through the membership, basically, because we have different people that pop in, and I know who all the board members are, so let's do that quickly.
Sure. So in addition to the chair and vice chair Kerwin, we have members Doss, Lynch, Manco, Robinson, and Stapleton.
And the person who's talking is our executive director, Rachel Heiss. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Let me give a couple of comments. First of all, to thank the staff for all the work that you've done. We have an ongoing collaboration that I think has worked very well with the State Board of Education, Josh Michaels, and of course, Dr. Wright. We had an opportunity yesterday to provide testimony for the General Assembly of 4 committees. We are waiting to see what the ultimate legislative path may be. We will talk a little bit more in detail about what was stated and what the position may be as it relates to going forward from the AIB. There is a motion that will ask the board to consider later on in the program, and I hope that everyone has had an opportunity to look at it. We provided it, I think, in the last couple of days, but we will have a chance to discuss that and a little bit more about the legislative challenges we see going forward. Let me also thank and acknowledge our vice chair, who's also participated in Annapolis as well. As you know, this is the time of the year where there are a number of hearings, committee meetings, and a number of concerns that have been raised about the blueprint related to the budget and other matters as well. A series of ongoing meetings with various components of education around the state that are ongoing, and we continue to work with them as aggressively as possible. We have had a number of inquiries from Carroll County, and I hope that everyone has had an opportunity to read those. We will have a few comments about that during today's session, but more or less, let's look at the overall agenda for today and to see whether or not there are any items that you would want to either address out of order or change, or any suggestions that you may have related to the agenda before you. But before I do that, the next thing I will do, of course, is to adopt the meeting summary from our last meeting. Is there a motion to adopt the summaries?
I'll move it.
The second to the motion? I'll second it. It's been moved and probably second that we adopt our last meeting summary. There any question or discussion reference to the summary? Hearing none. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? Hearing none, they're so adopted. As indicated a moment ago, we take an opportunity right now to look at the agenda for today. And if there are any changes or adjustments to the agenda, one thing that I think Ms. Heiss may want to explain, because contrary to the normal pattern, we will go into executive session and then come back out in order to get the item number 9 on the agenda. And the reason for that is that is scheduled by time for 4 p.m. today. Is that correct, Ms. Heiss?
Correct. So we will proceed through our agenda, go into closed session, and then come back into public session at 4 p.m. for the last presentation.
Right. Okay. Okay, unless there are any questions related to the agenda, we will go now to Mrs. Heiss as it relates to item number, to public comments at this point in time. Yes.
So the first speaker is Jason Dougal, who is actually a strategic facilitator, part of the technical assistance program for AIB and with the National Center for Education and the Economy. Mr. Dougal.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for this opportunity. I'll try to cover a lot of ground very quickly. As Rachel mentioned, my name is Jason Dougal. I'm the president of the National Center on Education and the Economy and the AIB strategic facilitator assigned to support Anne Arundel County Public Schools. Through NCE, I've had a really unique opportunity to develop extensive expertise regarding teacher career ladders. I've spent a lot of time in both Singapore and Shanghai, really closely studying their systems. And I've been asked today to share my impression of the AACPS career ladder from my firsthand experience visiting about a dozen of their pilot schools and working with their lead teachers in their district-supported professional learning sessions throughout this first year. Obviously, I'm somewhat biased since I've been working with AACPS for well over a year, but that work has allowed me to see just how much effort went into the planning for this current year's implementation of level 4 teacher roles as part of their career ladder. As most of you all know, career ladders in high-performing countries obviously offer pay increases at each step of the ladder rather than being based on seniority or advanced degrees. But the real driving force behind these career ladders is giving teachers an opportunity to take on more responsibility and have a deeper impact on more students, all while not leaving the classroom. In short, career ladders are structures that support teacher leadership development and instructional excellence, not simply pay scales. What I'm seeing in AACPS is a great start to what can become potentially a model for the state of what a full rollout of a career ladder system could look like at a district level. While the implementation is somewhat idiosyncratic at each school and far from perfect yet, there are some really encouraging signs the lead teacher role is having the desired impact on both the peer teachers and students in these pilot schools. In accordance with the blueprint, lead teachers are teaching about 50% of their time and engaging in collaborative support for their peers for about 50% of their time. During that 50% of teaching time, in addition to teaching on their own for a portion of the day, some lead teachers are primarily teaching shoulder to shoulder with mentee teachers, where they can provide real-time instantaneous feedback and support. Others are teaching in small groups of students who need the most support in a sort of pull-out type of differentiation model right there within the mentee teacher's classroom. And some lead teachers are teaching the new CKLA curriculum that's been adopted at AACPS to show others how to do it effectively. In addition to this 50% of time dedicated to direct teaching of students, there are a variety of support and collaboration roles these lead teachers are playing in the various pilot schools. Again, a few examples hopefully will bring that to life, such as some of these lead teachers are leading weekly PLCs for whole grade level teams of teachers. Others are providing opportunities for novice teachers to plan with and then observe the lead teacher teaching their own regular class, not a demo class, and then debriefing afterwards. And others are obviously observing, giving feedback to, and coaching struggling teachers. These variations across schools are a strength of the pilot rather than a weakness, because they're giving lead teachers and principals the freedom to experiment with how best to support their teachers and students. What has struck me most is how important it is that these lead teachers teach side by side with the teachers they're tasked with supporting, because it allows them to have credibility and authenticity with those peers. Many of these lead teachers are new to their pilot schools, and some are even less experienced than some of the teachers they're being asked to support. And I can't emphasize this enough. The only way these lead teachers can be effective is if they earn the respect of the teachers in the buildings, and working shoulder to shoulder with them and tackling the tough assignments in terms of students and or curriculum gives those lead teachers the credibility they need to be really effective. What is also clear to me is that there is now much more demand for additional lead teachers in these pilot schools, because more teachers want the type of support that they're seeing others get, which is great. And I'll just point this out lastly. AACPS has also set up monthly professional learning opportunities to support all those lead teachers. There's about 16 of them across the district as a group, and the lead teachers really appreciate this time to work together. Obviously, there's a lot happening within AACPS in these pilot schools right now, but there's a lot that the state and other districts can learn from and adapt to their own needs and context. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Jason. You used the term pilot school several times. I think I know what that means. Could you just refresh so I'm sure about what I think that is?
Sure. The pilot schools are a dozen schools in AACPS that have this lead teacher role. And so they're piloting the lead teacher position in the schools. They're regular functioning elementary schools across the district.
Okay, thanks very much.
Well,
Are there any other questions or comments?
Yeah, thank you for this excellent report. It's very encouraging. When do you see this rollout to be no longer just pilots, but in the schools across the county?
That's really a question more for Anne Arundel County. I know that they're expanding to some secondary schools in this upcoming year. And my hope is that we can expand to have more lead teachers even in the current pilot schools, because the demand is just so high for that level of support, which is wonderful.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah, thank you so very much for your testimony.
I appreciate it, Chairman. Thank
Yes,
you
sir.
so much. Thanks to all of you.
Next, we have Liz Zogby, who is with the Maryland Down Syndrome Advocacy Coalition and also co-chair of the Special Education Work Group. Ms. Zogby.
Hi, good afternoon. Chair Leggett, Vice Chair Kerwin, members of the AIB, thanks for having me. First, I want to just thank you for creating the Special Education Work Group and let you know that the scope of our work has really been unprecedented, and I'm excited to begin to share some of the final recommendations and our prioritized plan with you in a few months. I'm here today, though, to talk about collaborative time and students with disabilities. I wasn't able to get a spot to speak at the joint board meeting a few weeks ago, and obviously a lot has been said in the interim, including about the 5 hours of testimony that we heard yesterday in Annapolis. And I know that for the next few weeks, the center of the debate will really shift from the boards that are responsible for implementation and accountability to those who hold the purse strings. But I thought I might still come and share my thoughts with you, because if the advocacy efforts of teachers, students, local superintendents, and others result in the legislature rejecting the proposed cuts and delay to a collaborative time, this body and the state board and educators across the state are going to need to figure out how to make it possible. So a fundamental truth and a consistent theme of the Special Education Work Group is that the best way to improve education and outcomes for students with disabilities is to improve general education, to ensure that general educators have the knowledge and skills to teach to the expected variability of their classrooms, including students with disabilities, to improve professional learning, to implement schedules and staffing models that support students and make it possible for the adults to do great work, improving working conditions that promote retention. And a critical piece of that puzzle is time for general and special educators to plan instruction together, think deeply about students, reflect on their practice, and fill gaps in their knowledge and skills, as well as support small groups and individual students. The collaborative time is really the programmatic piece of the blueprint that's most likely to positively impact students with disabilities by increasing educator capacity and improving working conditions. So if we're not yet in a position to begin scaling up collaborative time as originally envisioned by the blueprint, we could invest those same dollars by building toward implementation of collaborative time in every school across the state. For example, by building community partnerships with out-of-school time providers to create space for teacher collaboration during the day, by designing innovative schedules, and implementing tutoring programs to support the new literacy policy and upcoming math initiatives. And finally, by supporting new and conditionally licensed teachers who need the collaborative time more than any other educators. Finally, one important missing piece for the long-term success of collaborative time and the blueprint as a whole is the design of a statewide comprehensive plan for teacher recruitment and retention, with attention to building a diverse workforce that's prepared to effectively teach to the expected variability of every classroom, with targets for every strategy. Disconnected grow your own initiatives or pilots that never scale are not going to get us there. And of course, advocates fear that the proposed 4-year pause will turn into a permanent disinvestment in our kids and our schools again. We have a long way to go. We've come a long way. And I thank you for your leadership. And I look forward to the work that we'll continue to do together to build the schools that our students and our families and our teachers deserve.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Ms. Zogby. Is there any questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you so very much.
Okay. Thanks so much.
All right.
The third person, I believe, is not here. Correct me if I'm okay. And then, as the chair noted before, we do have in the agenda, linked to the agenda and provided for the public, the written emails, which we're considering public comment, that the AIB has received over the past, I would say, week, from Carroll County residents. And included in that link are, because we have received almost 200 emails, so we did not provide every email, but we provided some examples of what are in the emails, and then also a list of everyone who has submitted an email. And it focuses on concerns about the proposed school system budget in Carroll County, and in part related to the minimum school funding requirement, or section 5234. So we could talk about it when we get to that agenda item, if you want to discuss it further, either now or then. But in part, it relates to the minimum school funding requirement.
Let's pick it up a little bit later with more in context, I think, at that point in time, unless there's some urgency by board members to do it now. Okay, well, I want to go on to your comments then.
Okay, so then the next, should we move on to the next item 3?
Yes.
Okay, so the first, we have a few items under item 3. The first item relates to a recommendation of approval for the Montgomery County Public Schools Blueprint Implementation Plan. And somebody's going to share their screen. Thank you very much. So as you all may remember, as I'm sure you all remember, we have the AIB has approved 23 of the blueprint implementation plans, including all of the components. And Montgomery County Schools did receive conditional approval pending receipt of signed and executed documentation around their career ladder and the first maintenance of certification. Next slide. So I think we covered that already. Thank you. So on February 10th, Montgomery County submitted the documentation of the first maintenance of certification amount, which is $3,000. That has been agreed upon, and AIB staff has reviewed the document, and it meets the requirements. And so we are recommending full approval of Montgomery County's 2024 blueprint plan and release of the fiscal 25 blueprint funds. And we do have a specific motion. So
right.
if there are any questions, or else we can
okay, why don't we
read the motion?
Why don't we read the motion? Let me make sure we're clear about it now that they've had conditional approval, and today is final approval based on the recent information that has been certified, or at least cleared by the staff in terms of what they indicated that they were in fact doing. So why don't we go ahead and read the motion, and we'll come back if there are any questions or comments about it in a moment or two. Okay?
Yes. So the motion is, after careful consideration of the recommendations of the AIB and the Maryland State Department of Education, and based on the board's own independent review of all documents provided, the motion is for the board to approve the 2024 Blueprint Implementation Plan and authorize release of the fiscal 2025 funds that are automatically withheld by law, and to clarify that the board's approval extends only to the elements of career letters that are set forth in a fully executed agreement between the LEA and the local education association, And this would be for Montgomery County Public Schools.
Okay, I'm going to make that motion. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Been moved and properly second. Are there any questions, comments on the motion before us? Okay. All right, then we're now prepared to vote. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion is approved, and we now have approval of all 4 of our LEAs throughout the state. Congratulations, staff, and thank again the various LEAs around the state. As indicated before, we know that this has been a challenging task for all to achieve this level of success, but it's very important for us to fully approve and get these plans before us so that will be a guide or goalposts or guardrails for us as we go forward. So thank you for all of the local coordinators and for the staff at the local levels of our own staff of helping us get to this point. Thank you very much.
Okay, the
Mr.
next
Burke.
item, I'm going to ask Ms. Pellerin, the Implementation Plan Director, to provide an update on the state agency plans.
Thank you. So going back to what we provided as an update last time, the Consortium on Coordinated Community Supports, their implementation plan was approved by the board in December. And since then, we have received, we have provided feedback since the fall to all state agencies that have submitted implementation plans, and all of them have submitted implementation plans. That includes MHEC, MSDE, the CT committee, the consortium whose plan was approved, as well as Juvenile Services Education Board. We have received updated submissions or partial submissions from both the Maryland Higher Education Commission, or MHEC, and MSDE. And we have received a full updated submission from MHEC. We received that recently, and we look forward to moving that forward to the board for in March. And we anticipate also being able to provide some additional recommendations in the coming months. And just a quick note that we also had feedback provided to JSEP, the Juvenile Services Education Program, and they did submit their implementation plan later. So, but we are still waiting on updated submissions from JSEP as well as CT committee. And as we receive those submissions, we're providing feedback and asking for any other clarifications or requests for revisions as needed. And we'll continue to provide updates as they come in.
Thank you. Okay, any questions or concerns about the process that we're following? Do we have a time frame that you mentioned, the time frame, Emma, for the conclusion of the process here?
It does depend in part on when we receive updated submissions from the remaining state agencies. As we said, we have some partial submissions as well as full submissions, but we hope to have updated additional recommendations for approval next month.
Okay, all right. Thank you. All right, Madam Executive Director, we can go on to the next item of 3B.
Thank you. So that next item is we wanted to just give you an update on the career ladder. Now that all 24 LEA plans are approved for their 2024 submissions, there is, as a reminder, we did provide a phased implementation of the career ladder to give the LEAs time to negotiate and sort of thoughtfully develop their career ladders. And so what was required in 2024 was related to levels 1 through 3 of the career ladder. Originally, everything else was going to be due July 1st of this year. We put out in collaboration with MSDE, we've been working on this jointly. We released guidance, draft guidance to the LEAs and to the teachers union representatives in November with proposed requirements for submission this year, 2025. And we received feedback on that draft in December. And we have been working to revise. And then we also received additional feedback from the Superintendents Association, as well as more recently from the Blueprint coordinators. And so we've taken all of that feedback and tried to come up with something that we think is reasonable, that also keeps moving us forward in implementing the career ladder as the Blueprint intended. So we just wanted to share this overview with you. It is still a draft. The LEAs have this revised draft, and our goal is to finalize this guidance next week through the state superintendent and myself to share with the LEAs as well as the teachers union representatives, so that they have this guidance, well in advance of that July 1 deadline. So at least 4 months is what we're striving to provide final guidance before deadlines. And so you can see here that what we're now proposing is that what is due July 1st of this year is really focused on level 4, building out level 4 of the teacher career ladder, but excluding the professor distinguished teacher, which is that highest level on the teacher ladder, and really is going to involve a little more collaboration between the school systems and the higher education and teacher preparation programs to really work through what those positions look like, because they're intended to be essentially joint appointments between an LEA and a higher education institution. So recognizing that that's probably going to take a little more time to sort out. And then we also have asked for the LEAs to submit their requirements and the opportunities for movement up the career ladder. That is something that in the feedback that we've given to LEAs around their original career ladder submissions, we've noted that more information on that would be needed in the next submission. And then as well as the salary compensation for essentially level 4 teachers, because they've already provided levels 1, 2, and 3 for level 4 teachers. And this just tying back to the Mr. Dougal's comments around the pilot that Anne Arundel is doing. I mean, they're essentially sort of piloting what a level 4 lead teacher, how it works in a school. They focused on elementary schools in the first year. And so they will need to submit, as all of the LEAs will need to submit, their career ladder for level 4 lead teachers, as well as sort of like how they're going to implement it over time, because obviously can't roll it out to all the schools all at one time. Anne Arundel is not the only system that is piloting level 4. We do have a couple of other systems that are piloting level 4, and we're hoping to learn from those pilots, both at the state level and also share it with the other LEAs as they're now developing their level 4. And then at the bottom, you can see the items that we are deferring to a later date. The first item is the 8-year plan to phase in collaborative time. That is due to obviously this is under consideration by the General Assembly. And originally that 8-year plan was due July 1st of this year. But given the unknown of what is going to happen with collaborative time, we obviously can't ask the LEAs to provide that on that timeline. So we are proposing to get through sessions, see where things land. It's possible that whatever passes will include a new timeline. And if not, then we would need to sort of reassess what the timeline should be based on whatever passes. I mentioned already that we're deferring that distinguished professor teacher item on level 4 of the teacher track. We also have deferred the teacher evaluation and peer assistance and review system. That is something that is a very significant change for most of our districts. And MSD and AIB recognize that that the LEAs need additional guidance around what that should look like and how to implement it, as well as time to do that. And so we want to give them the space to do that. And then we're also proposing assistant principals are one of the, they kind of live in two worlds in the career ladder. The law specifically says they're on level 3, but in most, if not all districts, they are essentially on the school leadership or administrator track. And so recognizing that that is a different bargaining unit in most of the districts, that will take more time for them to be able to do that work. And also some more guidance from MSDE and AIB. And then finally, we're proposing that the school leadership or administrator track, again, because it's a completely different bargaining unit, that we defer that build out of the school leadership track to a later date.
Okay.
So that's the overview. And you do have the full draft document if you want to review that.
Yeah. Okay.
And as I said, we've shared this with the LEAs and have gotten, I think just earlier today, there was a meeting in our career ladder community of practice, and they have developed some additional questions or areas where we may need to clarify the guidance. And we'll be taking a look at that and finalizing the guidance next week.
Okay. Any question reference to the career ladder and how we are proceeding accordingly?
Yes, I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
So, could you just say a word about the process for advancing on the career ladder? Is there is that detailed in these plans, and is there variety among the LEAs, or is there kind of a standard way in which decisions are made about advancing along the career ladder?
So the statute, the blueprint law does specify
Right.
a process
Uh-huh.
and for selecting level teachers at the different levels on level 4,
Mhm.
as well as on the school leadership track. So part of the guidance includes sort of specifically how does their career ladder that they submit to us follow the process that is in the statute,
Right.
as well as whatever other different adaptations of, however they are proposing to do that while maintaining in compliance with the law.
Mhm. But
And if you want more detail than that, I would ask Libby if she could share, and we can even share the more specific guidance if
actually,
that's helpful.
I am interested in that, but maybe I should do that offline. I don't want to take too much time. But as I recall, the decision it rests largely with the principal of the school. Is that correct?
It's the principal, so it's a recommend. So It's based on a recommendation from other teachers on the career ladder
Right,
to the principal and the superintendent.
right. That's it. That's what I recall from what the commission recommended, and I think that was um, accepted in the blueprint bill.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
sure. Member Robinson?
Yes. So, I remember in a previous meeting we had talked about the opportunity people might have to experiment with collaborative time and what that could look like, piloting things like that. I'm wondering about like some of the other things like professor distinguished teacher or PAR programs and things like that. If school systems have already started work in that area, or if they've got some things that they want to experiment with before or an actual date of it being submitted to the AIB, are there opportunities in those areas, like specifically the second and third bullet points? Like, are there opportunities for people to innovate and try things in the interim before it's officially expected to be due to the AIB?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that being said, at this point, AIB and MSD, we have not provided any real, other than what's in the statute, any more detailed guidance around distinguished professor teacher or PAR. And so there might be a bit of a reluctance to do that without having a little more information about, the frame of it, but absolutely, they have that flexibility.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Member Robinson. I think we'll proceed, ready to go to agenda item number 4 at this point, Ms. Heiss, the waiver process.
Yes, thank you. And so for this item, I want to ask Ms. Dutterer to share the draft policy that we have for your initial review, which also helps to explain what what we're talking about. So I will turn it over to Ms. Dutterer.
Wonderful. Thank you. Good afternoon. So this policy will look, at least in format, will look pretty familiar because it is fashioned much like the appeals process that you all adopted a year or two ago around withholding or releasing funds. So the law requires the AIB to adopt, it's called different things throughout the law, either an appeals or waiver process, through which local school systems can request greater flexibility for the funding requirements specific to minimum school funding and then some of the other special education funding and concentration of poverty funding. So I put together a draft to get the conversation started. The idea is to create a process. We thought a waiver process made the most sense because we're looking at, appeals are usually from decisions that this board would have already made. And really we're thinking about providing waivers or variances from requirements in the law, potentially. And so as we move down the page, if we can scroll down just a little bit to section 2, these grounds for requesting a waiver that are listed here, these are the three under A3 or A1, 2, and 3. These are the three grounds that are listed in statute. As you can see, they relate primarily to enrollment shifts. And then the third one relates to funding versus need requirements for specific categories of at-promise students. Under section 2B, I added sort of a catch-all for anything that wasn't in 1, 2, or 3. So if there are, if an LEA wants to make a waiver request for something that isn't included in one of those 3 buckets, they may do so. And as I think Ms. Heiss will go through after this, there have been some suggestions from LEAs regarding some other specific areas where they would like to have the ability to request a waiver. And so the rest of the policy really, again, is very similar to what you've already adopted in your previous appeals policy, just relating to process, relating to notice, and then, the things that would be required in a submission of a waiver request. And I can stand for questions if you have any.
I have a question. First of all, I'm glad we're developing such a policy. I mean, strictly speaking, once you have A, B, you don't need A. But there's nothing wrong with having A.
Correct. I laid out what was in the statute.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. But basically, you could request a waiver for any reason you thought you might be a waiver might be reasonable.
Correct. If the board decides to
Right.
Adopt this policy as is, you would have that
Right.
sort of open-ended ability, and that would be up
Right.
to the board.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments, or reference to this? We will take this up at a full motion at a later point, right? It has to be out for a little bit of time.
Yeah, so Ms. Dutter has sort of reviewed this initial draft. And then the other document that we wanted to share with you is we do meet regularly with the LEA's chief financial officers. And we did ask them to provide their input on what they would suggest that or request that we consider in the waiver policy. And if we can share that document on the screen. Thank you. Hopefully you all, yeah, it's so small. You also have this document separately if you want to but I'm going to read it out loud as well. So the first request from the CFOs is that there should be a waiver opportunity for LEAs that receive a significant portion of their funding historically from local funding, rather than state funding. And so this is, and then it further goes on to say this request is from a county that receives the majority of its funding from its county, 75%.
How does that question, that factor break down typically around the state on the funding?
So statewide, the funding, wealth equalization is all of other than teachers' retirement and transportation. All of the blueprint formulas are wealth equalized, meaning it takes into account the wealth of each county. So statewide, for each formula, 50% comes from the state and 50% comes from the counties. But depending on the wealth of each county, that percentage varies. There are floors in the statute that a county receives a minimum amount from the state of foundation funds and also of the at-promise formulas, 25% for the foundation and 40% for the at-promise programs, but otherwise it varies depending on the county's wealth.
Okay.
So that's the first request. Other than things that are in statute, which I'll point out, none of these have been incorporated into the draft yet. And what we would like to propose is that there be a subgroup of the board that would work on considering what to include in the draft that would then come back to the board in March for discussion. and then would also be open to public comment, so that we would then potentially be able to take action on the policy in April.
Let
So
me
that's-
ask Ms. Detter a question, because one of the challenges that I've always had is that when you enumerate so detailed requirements or things that you look at for a waiver, oftentimes you're not as inclusive and things are not included. And so you run against the argument that the regulation of the statute didn't include X. And you're never going to have a situation where everything is going to be included. Otherwise, the proposal will be a mile long. So do we run into a problem here, or the things that we enumerate are the only things that are there, or there are some catch-all portions that may not be included on the list of recommended changes or items that could be considered? How do you deal with that here? I don't want to put us in a position where if we didn't include it, we can't consider it, Jonathan.
Right, and that's a great question. I think in that section 2B that we just went over, that was sort of that catch-all provision. And so it would really be up to the board if you wanted to include additional itemized or enumerated grounds, or if you just wanted.
Non-enumerated. I'm talking about non-enumerated, things that are not enumerated.
I'm sorry. So
No, my concern was we're talking now about enumerating something. My concern, once you go here, there'll be some things that you didn't enumerate. So I'm talking about the non-enumerated thing.
Right. If we don't include that catch-all provision, then we would be the board would be limited to whatever you listed.
Right. Okay.
But we have that catch-all.
Right. The draft policy does have a catch-all right now. Obviously, you all haven't adopted anything yet,
Right.
but we have proposed a catch-all.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So these various requests from the LEA representatives, I mean, let's just say that we agreed with this. So we'd have this long laundry list, and then we'd have the catch-all if we went with the policy as drafted. So it makes me wonder, why do we even, if we're going to have the catch-all, why do we need to even consider these various requests?
Well, that's the question before you.
So what I would say is, I think the question is, are there specific, other than what the statute already provides,
Right.
Are there specific reasons that the board believes are justified as sort of categories that would justify a waiver? And if districts meet those, whether they're these or something else, if districts meet that criteria, that they would receive a waiver. So there would be some sort of, obviously it would still be up to your determination, but there would be sort of specific agreed upon reasons that a waiver would be given. And then the catch-all is if there's some unique situation that the board hadn't already considered, or was just not on anyone's radar, that an LEA believes is justified for requesting a waiver. That, to me, that's what the catch-all would be for.
Okay, thank you.
I just worry about having a long list of categories. I can understand having, 4 or 5 general areas in a catch-all, but if you have, if you go down to where you have 10 or 11 different waiver paths, it seems it gets, I think, a bit, I don't know, confusing isn't the right word, but I just think we ought to limit the broad categories if we're going to have a catch-all.
Well, that's what the small work group will look at.
Yeah, right.
And come back with
Absolutely.
a recommendation to
Right.
determine whether we say we're just a catch-all or a combination of a catch-all
Right.
in our
And,
broad
and some
category.
categories. Yeah.
Right, right. Thank you for your comment there.
And just a reminder, this is what they've asked for. It's not, we're not, we're just presenting to you what's been requested. I don't want to read the entire list to you, but I will point out that the third item, which is school systems should be allowed to meet this requirement on an aggregate basis, that is something that the superintendents have also raised. And this is the statute is specifically written by formula. And so for each formula, the money has to follow students to the school. So if considering it on an aggregate basis as a permanent sort of, yes, you've met the requirement, that would require a statutory change. That is not something that the board has the authority to as on a temporary basis, as part of a phase-in to meeting the full requirement, that might be something you could consider, but permanently it would require a change in the law. And likewise, I think at the bottom, there's a request about charter schools and not including them in the requirement. And again, that would require a statutory change because it applies to all public schools.
Okay.
And then there, one of the items is significant year-over-year enrollment changes. That's already in statute for at-promise students. But Heidi, correct me if I'm wrong. It's only for at-promise students, not for all students.
There is a provision that says a significant shift in total school level enrollment between
total enrollment. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So there are some suggestions around redistricting and there might be, those items might fall under that category that's already in the draft policy.
Okay.
Mr. Manko?
So just to be clear, I presume it will be the work of this this subgroup to go through this list of possible possible waiver recommendations to suss out which ones would have to be addressed via statute, because that would not be something where we would be able to provide a waiver for, and those would be excluded from the list. And then beyond that, this would be there would be a list that's constructed of some plausible things that waivers would be considered for, but that list would not be exhaustive, because there are other things that maybe we have not anticipated that will come about that a waiver would be decided on. I mean, all the waivers will be decided on a case-by-case basis, but many of these that require statutory adjustments would just be excluded out of automatically.
Yes. And we could just be very clear that it would require a statutory change.
Sure. Okay. Thank you for the clarity.
Absolutely. There may also be other additional suggestions beyond this list of possible reasons to include in the policy.
Okay. All right. Thanks for your comments. We'll establish a work group to come back and report to us on recommendation for the full board's consideration. Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Durham. Let's go on to the next item.
Yes. Sorry, I have to get the agenda in front of me
Okay.
so I know
Career
what the next
counseling,
item
number
is.
5.
Yes, career counseling. Just very briefly to sort of frame this out in context. We've talked about career counseling, but we wanted to really update you on the reports that were received after the first year of implementation of this new required program under the blueprint, around how career counseling is being implemented for middle and high school students in the first year, both in terms of the programmatic um, um, trends in what the LEAs with their workforce development partners and community colleges are doing, as well as the fiscal use of the funds. And then in addition, working with our partners at the CTE committee and MSTE, we've been working on identifying metrics that will be collected and that the programs will be evaluated based on, and we wanted to share those with you. So with that, I will turn this over to Rachel Amstutz, who is our policy director, and Gretchen Cheney, who is a policy analyst for Pillar 3.
Perfect. So to get us started, we wanted to just provide the larger context for everybody about career counseling again. So career counseling is required for every single Maryland middle and high school student. It is an integral component of the Blueprints model to ensure that every Maryland student receives a world-class education that prepares them for their future. It's not just an add-on. It's really essential in the building out of the Blueprint. The uniquenesses of our model, which are starting to gain some attention from other states actually, are that our model focuses on a partnership between 3 agencies to create the career counseling program. And those are our local workforce boards, our local education agencies, and the community colleges in each region. And that approach is intentional so that each of the agencies can bring forth their expertise and resources to help our middle school and high school students be able to identify and understand the options that are available to them for careers that they just may not even know about. In terms of process, the career counseling is governed by an MOU in each of our LEAs that all 3 parties jointly collaborate on and develop within some parameters. The biggest pieces of those MOUs govern the budget, the staffing, and the programming. There's lots of other details in there that you need to be able to execute a program like this. But we wanted to just provide that reminder for everybody about career counseling. If you're interested and want to hear from students and career counselors, our Pillar 3 advisory committee earlier this week met and had 2 or 3 students come speak about their experience with career counseling, coupled with their career counselor was actually there. So it was really neat to hear of the processes and the tools that have been used to help these students find some internships or apprenticeships to kind of narrow down, like, I think this is what I want to do in college because this is what I want to do as an adult. So worth the catch if you'd like to see it. And you can find that on our meetings tab on our website, the Pillar 3 Advisory Committee meeting from earlier this week. Go to the next slide. So in terms of annual and fiscal reports submitted to the AIB to monitor the implementation of the programs, it's a 2-part form. The law requires that the submission is due by June 30th annually, but at that point, our districts and the partners are not ready to submit a full financial report because they're just closing out that fiscal year. So the June 30th report includes a narrative and a summary and some data about hiring, the scope and sequence, the work that they've done to provide the individual counseling for students, and then any successes and challenges. The fiscal reports are then due in the middle of October to help us understand their planned uses, their actual uses, and this year, any carryover money that remained unspent from the first year. We are thrilled to have Gretchen Cheney on our team, and one of her first tasks when she came on part-time was to help us dig through these reports. And so I'm actually going to ask her to join and share some of our key findings that we learned from these reports.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, so we decided to review the annual and the fiscal reports at the same time because we wanted to understand the budgetary decisions and the plans for going forward based on year one implementation. So we are just finishing that up. We got a little held up with the MOU reviews earlier in the fall. We've drafted feedback for each county. Those have not been shared yet out, but we plan to get them out very shortly. But we did identify some takeaways and some common themes that we thought we could highlight for you today. And the partners are really generous, I thought, with sharing early wins and areas of challenge and kind of an honest assessment of how year one works. So we appreciate that. So as in year one, as it got started, we found that almost every county had fully hired or almost fully hired and gotten trained career coaches working in their middle schools and high schools by the end of the school year. Some had that success earlier on, some places took a little longer, but overall, we saw a general push towards hiring folks and getting folks in the schools. We asked about what happened prior to Blueprint implementation in terms of career exploration activities. It was very ad hoc and, varied by school and who had capacity to do what. And they generally said that we've definitely been able to expand our activities and our engagement across the grades. And some people are even reported like early signs of increased student engagement and interest in CTE and apprenticeship. So that was great. A lot of folks talked about the importance of integrating career coaches with the school counseling teams, the CT programs, and teachers, which will be key, because the delivery model looks a little different school to school. Sometimes they're going into core classes, sometimes doing lunch, some doing advisory. So it's nice that they're going to have to kind of figure out their role and situate themselves within a larger set of folks, so to make sure they reach every single student. Folks talked about the investments in software and data tracking systems, which will be key to going forward, just getting the scale up to reaching every single student again. And we find in most places the three lead partners are working collaboratively and contributing expertise as intended, which is great. I mean, some places it took a little longer to take hold. These partnerships are new, and so we appreciate that. Sometimes these things take a little longer to work out, but overall, we saw a lot of collaboration. If you go to the next slide. We have some challenges and some kind of areas where people need a little extra support. We found that, in some places program rollout was a little slower. There might have been some hiring issues or some, training issues, background checks, those kinds of things to get folks into schools. Many counties mentioned the high student caseloads. That is a challenge, trying to serve a lot of students across, if you're assigned one coach per school, that could be a lot of kids. And some coaches are serving, multiple schools. So that's also a challenge. The scope and sequences, we asked about that in the annual report, and they gave us, often some draft things, some initial planning. There's still a lot of work to be done to build out a robust sequence grade by grade and really be clear where the three partners are contributing. So that's still under development, but we hope to get updates on that very soon. The individualization piece, that is also a challenge, is to getting, making sure that students are really getting targeted supports depending on what their particular career interests and goals are. And then, there are obviously some funding and budgeting challenges as these things get stood up, spending plans, figuring out the roles of different partners, those kinds of things. So that is work that is being supported. The AIB has been offering strategic facilitation support to counties that need additional help getting to their MOUs and figuring out these different things. So that is underway. We've been offering that as help. And the two areas that we really saw requests for help going forward, in addition to that, would be getting advice and guidance on what kind of metrics and measures they should be monitoring and tracking. And we're going to cover that in a minute. And they asked for peer networking opportunities. They really want a chance to interact and learn from each other, which makes a lot of sense. So there's talk of a collaboration of an event to happen later in April to bring folks together, which would be great. And MSD is planning on taking a bigger role in leading some TA going forward. So those things are all underway and we're keeping track of them. So if we shift from the AIB reports, in addition to that, the blueprint law requires the CT committee to conduct an evaluation of career counseling. It's very specific. That's supposed to be an evaluation of career counseling agreements for best practices. So we think that'll be very useful because we're already seeing just in this initial analysis of our annual reports that one size doesn't really fit all, and it really can vary depending on where you are across the state, how the partnership works in terms of district size or the different partners' capacity, prior work that's being built on, et cetera. So we're hopeful that this evaluation will help, lend some additional insights into what this program could look like going forward. So that's on our plates. And then the next slide, the local partners, as I mentioned, have been asking for key metrics and measures that they should be tracking. So they have kind of some comparable data and elements across the state. And so the CT committee has taken the lead on organizing conversations among MSD, AIB, the different local partners. They've coordinated focus groups and sort of discussion roundtables to establish an initial set of key metrics. And so I wanted to share these with you. They were presented at the CT committee just last month. And they sort of, just to kind of break them up, we looked at middle school and high school. And I would just call out that, it's in addition to like, we want kids to sort of check a box of yes, completing a self-assessment, but the purpose of that is to then help them think about what happens next in career counseling. The career counselor can use that information and say, okay, if you're interested in engineering, let's be sure you go to this career fair or talk to this employer. And if you're interested in this kind of thing, we want to make sure you go visit this college visit or whatever it is. But we're using these sort of initial assessments to kind of help direct and personalize the career counseling services. And MSD is creating a new 6-year career academic plan that they're going to be rolling out later this spring. And so that's going to be a really good, useful tools for folks to kind of capture student interests and, update them and refine them as kids move through the grades and make their, changes as they always will as they're young people. So those pieces are sort of, feel like these things are already sort of being tracked across the state already as a general rule. And so it'd be good to kind of keep using those going forward. Did you have a question, Listeners? You want me to stop?
Yeah, I just kind of going back to that last slide. I'm glad your last to hear about your last statement, because the 6-year career and academic plans are something that already do exist. And so I think one of the things that I just want us to be thoughtful about is like, what is the value add of these programs? And so, or how are we utilizing our existing data in a new and interesting way that's really helping our students go beyond what has traditionally been an academic advising career counseling program in our schools.
Yeah, and I think they're hoping to roll out some additional, I think they're trying to relook at it a little bit more and make sure it works on paper, it works online with the different systems folks are already using, offer some guidance around it to the career counselors. What is your role? How does this fit? What is the role of the guidance counselor be advising on coursework? How do they think folks all come together and use this as a common tool? Because it may not have taken hold the way it was originally envisioned, or it needs to be kind of updated to reflect this new program. Does that make sense? Sorry, do you want to go ahead, Ms. Franco?
Yeah, it seems like some of the data that we would want to determine the success of the career counseling initiative extends beyond the years of schooling, because we would want to know labor data. How many individuals got jobs? What were their starting wages? How long did they stay in the job? Do the data systems that we have or that we are envisioning rolling out have the capacity to extend beyond the time, beyond the 12th grade? And how will we go about collecting those important data points that exist beyond the span of the 12 years, 13 years that the students are with us?
Yep. That was raised definitely at the CT committee meeting, and it's been raised among the partners along the way. I think they sort of settled on the partners on the field in the schools right now really needed an immediate set of metrics they should be focusing on. We're really clamoring for that kind of input, but there's a general acknowledgement that it would be great to think about what happens post high school. we sort of tabled that, I guess, for now. But it was absolutely raised at the CT committee, and they're hoping to kind of take another deep dive into that. So I think it's still pending. And my next slide also talks about there's also an interest in doing student surveys and focus groups with the coaches and with the students as well, to kind of get their sense of satisfaction. How helpful was this to you? What else might you need? So in addition to these kinds of things that the partners might be tracking along the way, there would be an interest in sort of getting the voice of students and coaches. And that could be done potentially post high school as well.
Gretchen, if I could chime in real quick, I think there's also, Dr. Manco, some really great opportunities. We're just on the early side of it right now with the conversations that it will tie into the work that's occurring in the interim evaluation with the blueprint outcomes, but also with our partners with MLDS who have access to the other systems of data to be able to track that more long term. So at this point, we're kind of able to tell you where things stand right now, but those conversations are absolutely happening.
Yep.
Okay.
On that point, I just wanted to agree that we do need to follow out. And what has to be thought about right now is, how do we identify the student? Do we have the data that identifies the students that we want to track or categorize? Or, if we want to look at the success of a certain type of program, are we capturing that information about the program? In terms of following them out, MLDS will have earnings per quarter and industry where they are employed. They will not have the job categorization of what type of job they're in. So that may be I think it'll be very useful information, but it's not going to be perfect. So I think if there's just an understanding of that would be great.
And a challenge is sort of assessing where career counseling had the impact versus something else. So I think it's tricky to sort out. Dr. Kerwin?
Dr. Kerwin?
Thank you. Excellent report. Early on, as we started, got this whole process started, there seemed to be some lack of alignment between the schools and the workforce development boards on the hiring, et cetera. I think you've indicated that much of the hiring has been done. And so is it your sense that whatever issues that were present in the early phases of this process have been addressed, and that that this is working now as we had hoped it would be?
Yeah, I would say, there's definitely work in progress. I mean, I'm not saying it's perfect by any means, and certainly there's a lot of partner conversations that are still going on about, again, the roles of each particular partner.
Right.
What is the role of the school district? And how do they work collaboratively? Like, how do you get past sort of like, I'd like to do this, I'd like to do this, I'd like to do this, and how do you kind of think about it jointly? So I think, in some places that is still an ongoing conversation that we are trying to help facilitate and move forward. But I think that could also be happening while there is still work in the schools. So I think the good news is the coaches have been hired and they are working in the schools.
Good.
I think it's getting the partnership to kind of come together, and the budgetary decisions in some places still need to be sorted out. So we're trying to make sure that that's being organized as best as possible.
Great.
And I would add to that, Dr. Kerwin, we are very fortunate that one of our strategic facilitators has extreme expertise in this area.
Oh.
And so Latifa has supported, she's now working with 8 of our counties.
Oh,
and
that's
that support, number one, has been instrumental because she works in this daily. It's her field. She understands the mission of the program, but then also it's helping to expand kind of common conversations, common processes that we're learning from each other as we're doing this, that we don't need to do things 24 times. We can kind of find what works and spread that. So Latifa's been huge hugely helpful. And one of her areas of supporting us now, what we've identified is that it's very different if you're a local workforce board and you're paired with one district and one community college, or if you're a local workforce board paired with 5 districts and a community college, or 3, or it's very different across the state. So Latifa Durant has been phenomenal in helping us and the CTE committee to help the relationships flourish, and to make sure that each of the 3 partners' intended purpose in the partnership is heard, and that they all have voice and have the opportunity to collaborate. So putting those structures in place. So I think I don't want to take away from how hard this is. Like the 3 partners, there's a lot of people that come at senior level, and then mid-level, and then the doer level. But I think we're getting over the hurdle in most places and seeing it move forward.
Well, it's very fortunate that we have this consultant with so much
Amazing.
expertise in the area. That's
I'm
obviously helpful.
always thankful that when I email her and say, "You got room for more business from us?" and she says, "Yes." So we're very fortunate.
Great. Well,
Dr.
thank you
Lynch?
very much.
Yes, I think this program has exceptional opportunity. I also think it has the potential to be nothing unique or different than what we've been doing. And so when I'm looking at metrics or the things that we're doing, I just challenge us to think beyond field trips and college visits or things we've been doing for 30, 40, 50, 100 years. You know, like these are nothing that is new. Part of what this program was really designed to do was to bring in industry voice to address our Maryland, our regional, our national, our global workforce needs, and to make sure that students are ready for that workforce. And so I think we have to be able to balance the very delicate nature of student interest and an opportunity that will be available to them, to make sure that we're putting them into a path that will have a lot of success and job opportunities when they're ready. And so I do continue to challenge us to make sure that we are aligning metrics with outcomes, with industry outcomes, with high need industries. And the blueprint law specifically requires partnerships with K through 12 and community colleges. And often our students then go from community colleges to some other post-secondary, and that is not part of these relationships. And I think what we want to make sure that we're doing is that we're consistently building opportunities for advising and communication to make sure that a 10th grade student making decisions about whether or not they're going to go into a CTE pathway, a dual enrollment pathway, an IB pathway, understands what the end point of each of those pathways are and what the career trajectories are. And that's sort of what I'm not really hearing in this. I'm hearing it's more of the same. And so I just challenge us to really hold steady. This is a lot of money that should be spent to do above and beyond what has already been happening in schools.
I don't disagree with you. I would go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I appreciate everything that you just said, and hope to be able to take that back to some of our upcoming planning sessions. I think year 1 was tricky, and you were right there with us. Like it's tricky to stand this up, but I will say that we are very fortunate to have he's a member of our advisory committee, Pillar 3, and then also president of the Maryland Workforce Association Board, Kirk Murray, and Anne Arundel County. He's the Anne Arundel County Workforce Director as well. But his passion for communicating that message, he has not stalled in saying that. So I do think maybe our startup has been a longer runway than what we've expected, but I do think that there are strong advocates who are championing this message, and that's where we need to get to in our the next steps. So thank you for saying that, and I think I'm going to use that recording in the future.
I would just say too, like we're trying to reach scale too, right? Whereas before it was very kind of ad hoc as to who got touched. So I do think the thought of reaching every single middle and high school student with these kinds of experiences is different than we've done in the past. I hear you that we need to kind of keep elevating it. And I do think it's kind of pushing the high schools to think about the post CCR pathways. Like they're hearing from the students and the workforce partners of like, is this enough what you have with CT or with dual enrollment, and what can we do to beef these up, and what experiences can we add onto it, and can we build out apprenticeships? And so I do think it's kind of pushing the conversation and helping things kind of move along. And building out the career pathways, I think, is a big piece of this work that the partners need to work on, about really being clear about what the different steps are that students can access within high school and then beyond. So I think you're absolutely right. I think it's got a lot of pieces working in parallel, and hopefully they're going to keep getting stronger over time.
Okay. Any other questions?
So I think we have just a couple more slides, but I mostly touched on
Okay,
them. There was just about, we are hoping to do some surveys and focus groups of the students, get their impressions on student satisfaction with the career counseling services, which is something that's built into the AIB career comprehensive implementation plan as an outcome, and then to get the voices of the career counselors themselves. So that's, again, work that needs to be sussed out a little bit, but we're hoping we can embed things in existing MSDE surveys. We could maybe embed things into CT, ERT visits and ask more from the career counselors and get their input. So that is work that's ongoing. And as you said, someone said about the longer term metrics, the next slide, it's just the last steps. We're going to have continuing conversations about possible long-term metrics to measure impact post-high school into college and careers. But in the meantime, we're hoping that the career counseling partners can use its initial set of metrics and plan on reporting on those, whether it's in the AIB reports or CT committee reports upcoming. We will do another annual report this June, which will give us another year of data on year 2. And we are having some spring check-in calls, which is what we did last year with all the partners, to kind of, again, make sure the partnership piece is working, see where we can offer interventions as needed. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? If not, we'll now go to our item number 6, I think it is. That is our legislative update. The first item on here is ICE will go through, but I wanted to sort of set the stage a little bit on a couple of items, because we all did not have an opportunity to participate or look at what had happened yesterday as related to the legislation introduced by the governor and our response. I participated as a part of a panel, including the superintendent and the chair of the MSDE, the president. And in anticipation of that, we wanted to convey a couple of things from us. One, to make certain that the General Assembly understood fully the role of AIB. Secondly, to ensure that we were implementing the blueprint with fidelity. And that although we have worked with various components of the General Assembly, talked to some degree with some of the people in the legislative branch, we are in fact an independent agency of state government. And so before we go to what ultimately I would hope that we would do at some point in this discussion, Ms. Heiss, that is to adopt a motion that has been circulated, and I assume everyone has received the motion and understand the backdrop. But I want to read, just for clarity, a key component of the statement that I provided yesterday. This is just one paragraph from that, and it provides us with at least a framework for what Ms. Wright and others will, Heiss and others will discuss in a moment. And it reads as follows. In adopting the motion to delay collaborative time, the AIB position is that the foundation program will be the only formula impacted by the delay. We stated that there should be no impact on promise funding formulas, including compensatory education, multilingual learners, and special education. The AIB, at its regular scheduled meeting, which is today, I expect will formally adopt a position that protects the Blueprint funding for Ed Promise students and community schools. Also went on to say, yes, we have made encouraging progress, but there are still challenges facing our students with greatest needs. We cannot afford at this juncture to make adjustments that will have collateral and unintended consequences that results in funding less than what is called for in the Blueprint for Community Schools and our Ed Promise students. That provides the framework for the motion that we will discuss, and you have an opportunity to discuss that in great detail. But I think that it was important to hear what I stated yesterday and know why I stated it and what our role is now to adopt or not adopt the motion that will come before you in a few minutes. So with that, Ms. Heiss, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then at some point, we'll read out the motion and have a discussion around your various positions and comments you may want to make. So, Ms. Heiss?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we can either go straight to that motion now, or we can and then come back to some of the other slides we have, or what's
Okay.
your preference?
I want
Go
to go
straight.
directly to that if we can.
I thought you might. So if we can go to, yes, perfect. Slide. So I think the chair has, pretty much said it all. So happy to read the motion, or if someone else would like to read the motion for you all to consider, unless you want, if there are questions about the position before we read the motion.
Rachel, if we read the motion, we'll have an opportunity to discuss before vote.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay. Why don't we
absolutely.
read it, and then at the time of reading, before we consider it, a vote on it, we'll have a chance to walk through it and hear your comments or questions.
Thank you.
Okay. So the motion is, it is the position of the AIB that preserving the integrity of the Blueprint's funding formulas for at-promise students is critical to meeting the goal that every Maryland student is college and career ready before leaving high school. Therefore, the AIB will not recommend and does not support any reduction to Blueprint funding for at-promise students in any legislation before the General Assembly. The AIB recommends maintaining funding to support at-promise students, specifically compensatory education, concentration of poverty or community school funding, multilingual learner, and special education at the levels that were originally called for in the Blueprint for Maryland's future.
Now, you had a question? Was there a question raised, comment? I'm going to make the motion that we adopt the motion as second to the motion.
I second it.
Okay, and properly second. Now it is before us for discussion, comments, or adjustments thereto. Okay. Ms. Lynch, did you have a question?
I did have a question because
Okay.
I think as the AIB, we have a really unique role and responsibility to both make sure that the blueprint as it was originally intended, the structures and the financing, the funding levels that we know there was so much work that went into identifying what these appropriate levels would be in order to do the work we're set. And so I think we do have the responsibility to make sure that if we are requiring work by our school systems, that the funding remains at the level that allows them to do that work. And I think that is important. And at the same time, as the AIB, we have the responsibility to evaluate outcomes to make sure that these levels of funding are providing the student success and movement and results that we would expect with this level of investment. And if not, to think creatively about how we could make important adjustments that would change those outcomes, because ultimately these investments are for students to be successful. And so my question is, what data are we utilizing, and sort of what are our decision points at which we are looking at these programs to make determinations about whether or not the levels of funding are sufficient, not sufficient, you know, overly compensated. What is our decision-making process and the data that we're using to make these decisions? And when does that happen?
Thank you for your question. It's an excellent question. I'm not sure that we know the answer to that at this point in time, because until we've had sufficient results and further analysis, we will not know whether the original funding that was provided is sufficient or insufficient. But the question before us is that we started with a plan that anticipated a certain level of funding, especially to the most at risk or at promise students. And if you look at the most recent results, that cohort of students are falling further and further behind. And so the object of this motion is at a minimum to provide us with the foundation for the funding that was originally anticipated. We will then, going through the initial process, I assume, make further analysis to determine whether or not, even in the first place, that was adequate or inadequate, because that would be a decision that we would have to report back to the General Assembly at some point, and they would have to make a determination about what needs to happen from that point on. But I'm not sure we can answer that question because sufficient time has not passed that would allow us to say with certainty that the level of funding was in fact quite adequate. But we do know that at a minimum, we run a very strong risk that the funding will be reduced. And if we are going to err, we should not err on the side that would potentially negatively impact those students at risk. Anything else you want to add, Ms. Heiss, in terms of additional comments on that?
Yes, thank you. And then I see Dr. Kerwin's hand up, but if I could just make a couple of points. I think that the interim evaluation that we are about to begin, part of that work is going to be looking at how funds are being used, including these funds that we're talking about, and then also looking at where we have data, what outcomes we're achieving and whether we're on track to meet the goals of the blueprint. And specifically, we have the aligned metrics that we, with the targets that we've jointly adopted with the State Board of Education that focus specifically on, literacy and math proficiency, broken down, disaggregated by student populations that I think, at least in part, gets at your question. And if we're not seeing progress, and again, it's up to the board to determine what sufficient progress looks like, then we would need to, dig deeper. Is it how the money is being used? Is it the amount of money? Is it both? So I think we're just to the point where we're going to be able to start to do those evaluations as we are looking at the outcome data now that we have several years of blueprint implementation underway.
Was it Mr. Dr. Curran?
Yes. Actually, Executive Director Heiss said what I was going to say to Member Lynch. The whole concept was that the early years, AIB's focus is on the faithful implementation of the blueprint. Now, at a certain point, and that point is roughly at this period, we begin to look at the results, and it's with that kind of data that we'll be able to make the kind of analysis that you so correctly point out needs to be made. But I think that is on our agenda and is coming in both with the interim report and as we begin to see how we're doing against the metrics. So, but I don't want to, yeah, I think Executive Director Heiss covered that very well. I do just want to say, Mr. Chairman, how much I appreciate your leadership on this very difficult issue, and the way you represented the board at the hearing. And just wanted to note that, to express my appreciation for all of your efforts in this regard.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Dr. Doss.
Thank you. Actually, this is a question for Executive Director Heiss. Can you explain why these students are referred to as at promise students?
Well, yes, I can, although Dr. Kerwin might also want to speak up on this, but this is something when the Kerwin Commission was meeting. So typically, students that fall into these what we call targeted funding categories are referred to as at-risk students, mean at risk of failing to succeed academically. And the discussion in the commission, and I believe also our equity consultant, Dr. Toldson, brought this up, was that it's a negative terminology to refer to them as at risk, and that really that they are the promise of the opportunity and the achieving the academic outcomes that we expect of all our students is where that at promise term came from. And it actually is in the statute that those three funding formulas for compensatory education, multilingual learners, and special education students are referred to collectively as the at promise programs.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any further comments or questions? Well, let me add one other component, because I was asked this question by not one, but two reporters yesterday morning. And the question essentially was, given the challenges to the blueprint and given some of the changes that have been suggested by the administration and been considered by the General Assembly, did we have the full support of members of the General Assembly and or the government? And my response was absolutely yes. I say that because the state, even under the proposal suggested by the governor, is still spending quite a deal of money here. And I have not heard or seen anyone suggested that they wanted to abandon or retreat from what we are doing. There may be some approaches, and we have taken an approach that I think is consistent with our mandate to exercise and to ensure that we achieve the outcomes that we think are appropriate. We just simply differ with the administration approach on this piece of it. In part, we agree, in part on the collaborative time. And that's what I spoke to yesterday about the collaborative time, with the caveats that I've just described. But to suggest that anyone, any component therein, from my perspective, has retreated from this is inaccurate. We just simply disagree, because our fundamental point is to make sure that we implement this with fidelity. And we can't make that statement honestly if we retreat on the community school component of this. And this is why I think this motion is important, to ensure that that point is made fully and clearly. But this is not to suggest in any form or fashion that we agree with any statements out there that this government and or the members of the General Assembly, anyone else, that take in or retreat on the blueprint for Maryland's future. Okay, with that, I'm going to now call the question unless there are additional comments or questions. All in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposition? Seeing none, the ayes have it. The motion is so approved. Back to you, Ms. Heiss.
Yes, thank you. So I think if we can just, and I will ask our Government Relations Director, Joyce Schaefer, if she can walk through the other slides that we have. We just wanted to give you an update on what we've been doing and some of the recent positions and upcoming bills that we're considering taking a position on. Ms. Schaefer?
Thank you. Yep, thank you. So just as a broad overview, we are at day 44 of the 90-day session, which means that tomorrow is officially the halfway point of the session, which ends sine die on April 7th. On March 17th, I'll just note that that is the deadline for bills to cross from one house over to the other house for consideration. And so far, since our last update at the last meeting, both Chair Leggett and Vice Chair Kerwin, along with Executive Director Heiss, testified in front of the budget subcommittees, both in the House and on the Senate side, with relation to the AIB's budget. And then, of course, Chair Leggett just summarized his testimony yesterday on the governor's bill, which was a very lengthy hearing, I want to add, with a lot of advocates attending. Next slide, Rashida, thanks. So we did want to share with you that we have a bill consideration process that we undertake in order to provide recommendations and just to keep track of bills as well. So we're tracking bills with direct impact, and what we mean by that are bills that make changes to the blueprint and its implementation. They make changes to other parts of the education articles that have a direct effect on the blueprint implementation, or they make budgetary changes to blueprint funding, either the funding itself, the funding formulas and grants, or the revenue for the blueprint. And then we're also tracking bills that have an indirect impact to the blueprint, whether they are indirect changes to, say, revenue, or they may have some related impact or consequence. Those kinds of bills that don't have direct impact now might have impact down the road. We'll go into detail about these particular characteristics in the next slide, but just to complete the overview of the process by which we take a position and make recommendations for positions for your adoption. Direct impact bills are reviewed when we are able, and because of the timing of session, by the full board. And especially when there's a substantial piece of legislation that is wide-ranging and impacts, let's say, 3 or more of the pillars. So that would be a substantive bill. The process that you have used in the past, and which we are using currently on smaller, more targeted bills that still have impact, but are more limited in scope, maybe to 1 pillar or 2 pillars in a very targeted way. We're using a 3-member subcommittee process, which is comprised of the chair, the vice chair, and then a member that is related to that particular pillar. And then, of course, final positions are always going to be shared with the full board, regardless of how we come up to those positions, whether they're direct communications in the weekly legislative update, and of course at regular IAB meetings. Arshia, you can go into the next slide. So just to also continue to share with you the principles by which we recommend positions to the board, and some of the criteria we use. I would say that direct impact bills are very straightforward. They make direct changes to the implementation, blueprint funding, the AIB's role and responsibilities, and determining whether their direct impact is fairly easy. It's a little more nuanced when we're looking at bills with indirect impact, or very limited impact, or tangential impact. So bills that might speak to some of the pillars, for example, but might have impact not now, but perhaps down the road. So an example of something with limited impact would be there's a bill to establish a tax-free day for qualified veterans on Veterans Day. But the revenue that's going to be generated by that bill is very minimal. They're estimating something like $5,700 to $6,000 a year, all the way out to FY30. So that is a bill we're tracking, but we're not considering it to be direct impact or something that we have to pay very close attention to. Another bill that I might highlight is there's a bill to establish a math credit to be obtained by taking a college prep or AP computer science course. And that would have to be taken in conjunction with or after a student takes Algebra 2. And they would gain 1 credit towards graduation, towards their math credit. But that is not anything that is impactful at the moment, but down the road might be impactful in terms of CCR, for example. In terms of potential positions, there's several of them that we would take. We either support or oppose. I think that's very understandable. Support with amendments if there were something that we were to support, but we would like to suggest changes to the bill to strengthen it from a blueprint implementation perspective. We could also submit a letter of information which allows us to point out some considerations that we would like the legislators to take into consideration, and that would help them inform their decision making. Or if the AIB would want to remain agnostic on a piece of legislation, we would just simply take no position. Arshia, go to the next slide. We've already gone over the governor's education bill, so I just wanted to include this slide to sort of give you a refresher in terms of the components that bill affects, and that is why we took a position. It's a fairly substantial bill. It makes several adjustments, and it's fairly wide sweeping. Arshia, you can go to the next slide. I can't see that. Did you switch?
Yeah, we already covered this slide. Well, regarding the governor.
Okay. And the motion, so great. So the next slide. So we submitted this week, there were hearings for 2 bills that we were tracking with impact. One was the pre-kindergarten bill, which changes the definition of Tier 1 3-year-olds and effectively excludes them from being able to access publicly provided pre-kindergarten and would only allow them to be served by private providers. We felt this would substantially limit the availability and access to pre-K opportunities for these students. The legislation didn't consider 3-year-olds who might say already be enrolled in a public school program. Some of them might already have either an individualized family service plan or an individualized education plan. We also noted that some families might need things that are provided by public school programs, such as transportation. We certainly didn't want to create barriers for families to accessing pre-K programs. And then at this juncture, we also felt that it was important to cultivate seats from both public and private providers when we can. So to limit those seats felt very limiting in terms of what we're trying to achieve in our goals with expanding pre-K and making sure that, again, families had a wide range of choices. And particularly we know that there are childcare pre-K deserts among private providers. And we certainly wanted to make sure students were served in those communities. We also took a joint position of opposition with MSDE and submitted that testimony for a bill regarding the career ladder and making adjustments to teacher classroom teaching time and moving that teaching time from 60% to 80%. That was directly against the blueprint implementation. So we worked with MSDE to oppose that bill. Rashid, you can go on to the next slide. So we're also tracking bills that have future hearings. These are a list of those. The new teacher retention program is a establishment of a teacher retention program that would require county boards to prioritize addressing issues facing new teachers that are from diverse backgrounds. For example, teachers with specific challenges of teaching in high need or in schools or in subjects with high turnover rates. It defines, I just want to note, it defines a new teacher as one who has taught for less than 2 years. It also provides for a coordinator to administrate those cohorts in those school systems, as well as a mentor for one-on-one mentoring. The education bill for career counseling program for middle school and high school students. With regard to minimum school funding that is distributed to local workforce development boards, it extends, we're at this point, the current legislation that in FY 25 and 26, the funding amount is increased by an inflation adjustment. It extends that increase from FY 25 and every year thereafter. And then there is a bill proposing that portfolio-based assessment by a nationally accredited teacher preparation program be added to one of the qualifications for an initial teacher certificate. So those we'll be reviewing those bills and the future bills that we're looking to see when they'll be scheduled for hearings and using the three-person subcommittee, three-member subcommittee process by which to bring staff recommendations on positions and to vet those positions through that process.
Great. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you.
Are there any questions? We can move on to the next item, which is the executive director update. The first item is an update on outreach and communications, and Arshia Sethi Snowden, our director of outreach and communications, is here to share the update.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So in terms of outreach and communications, we have a new one-pager that is linked in the agenda, both the members and public agenda, that is posted on our resources pages as well. And we printed and distributed these to all legislators yesterday, as well as advocates and attendees at the hearing yesterday as well. This one pager is the implementation progress highlights and really focuses on the progress that's been made in the third full year of blueprint implementation and over the past 3 years as well. we're also working on a version that highlights by LEA and really specifically looks at the data by LEA as well, which will be coming soon. We also have sent out our third AIB update. As a reminder, this is our email newsletter that goes out after our board meetings, typically a week or so after the board meeting. And these have been really successful in informing and reaching over 1,000 people on our newsletter list who've opened and engaged with them, as well as sharing highlights, recaps, updates. We've also posted these on our website resources page. So if someone right now is not signed up for our newsletter but wants to see these updates, you can go to our resources page, and there's also a link there to sign up to our email list as well. And then, as we've talked about the last few meetings, our website redesign, we met with Do It since our last meeting and have received clarity on the CMS system that we'll be using to update our website. We have an upcoming meeting with them next week to get set up there, and our contractor has been prepping for that so that we can start building the website. So more to come on that, but we have been moving forward in that process as well. Any questions?
Like again to the website again. What's the time frame of that?
Spring still. I'm hoping to get you a more
spring
updated.
Of what year?
This year, spring of this year. But we really have, the biggest thing that was holding us up was that CMS system information that we needed from Do It. So we've met with them. We know how we can move forward, and we're building from there. But I'm hoping to have a more concrete timeline as we get in there and start building.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
By the way, the one pager I thought was very well done and got good response to it, and you can see it and highlighted in color. Was really the 2 pages, both sides of it. But I thought it was very well done. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks to the team also. That was definitely a team effort for getting that done and printed and distributed. So I appreciate everyone's input there as well.
And if I can just add, we're going to continue to update that so that, that's going to be a living document. I think we have a really good template now to share that in a user-friendly way. So thank you. The next item is an update on the Blueprint interim evaluation. Ms. Pellerin?
Yes, I can provide a quick update. As we all know, at the last AIB meeting, AIB staff recommended and the board voted to award the contract for the interim evaluation to NORC at the University of Chicago. And AIB and NORC are in negotiations over the final contract. We do anticipate awarding the signature before the end of the month.
Hold on. You said Chicago. They're in Maryland, in Montgomery County, right? Also.
Yes, they do have an office in Maryland.
That's
yes,
what I heard you.
Bethesda.
That's what I heard you say, right?
Yes.
They're in
yes.
Maryland. Okay, thank you.
Yes, they have headquarters. They have an office in Bethesda. But yes.
Oh, thank you.
That's
what I heard.
Yep. Yes. We are anticipating award signature for the final contract before the end of this month, before the end of February, and then the work will begin 5 days after the contract execution. Anybody have any questions? Okay.
I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then for the next 2 updates, I would ask our finance director, Alexandra Vernon, to provide the update.
Thank you so much, Executive Director Rachel Heiss. So the very quick office update. The lease for the office space is on the Board of Public Works agenda for next Wednesday, February the 26th. And then the approval by our board is scheduled for the next AIB board meeting, which is on March 20th. So we'll be able to share a little bit more information at that time. And then next slide. And then for the finance update, as you recall, the total mandated amount for technical assistance is $9 million, and it was split as $3 million per year for 3 years. To date, the AIB has awarded $6.2 million. Phase 1 is nearing completion. There are 5 LEAs that are finalizing their work through no cost extension still. For the current phase, for phase 2, we've already awarded $3.8 million, of which the majority of the funding is going towards the resource allocation and strategic budgeting, and that's to assist in reallocating resources to maximize the blueprint outcomes. And for the upcoming year, fiscal year 2026, the governor's allowance does not include funding for technical assistance. All right, next slide, thank you. And then this chart just shows the grant awards by LEA. Phase 1 is shown in red, and as you can see, there's 2 LEAs that did not participate in the initial phase 1 awards. However, all LEAs are participating in at least one focus area of the phase 2 grant program. Are there any questions about the technical assistance grants or funding?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so then with that funding summary, I can pass the baton to Tiara Booker-Dwyer, our strategic facilitator lead, and she will share some of the work that's been happening through our grant program.
Tiara is in the process of entering. Tiara, we are ready to pass it to you if you are ready, and we're also going to pull up the slide deck for you.
Can I control the slide deck? I can pull it up.
Oh, perfect. Sure.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. And I will share my screen. Okay, good afternoon, members of the Accountability and Implementation Board. We know that school systems are deep into the implementation of Blueprint for Maryland's future, and they are not doing this transformative work to improve the quality of education for all of our students alone. They are receiving assistance from the AIB through the Technical Assistance Grant Program. So I am Tiara Booker-Dwyer, a senior policy associate at Policy Studies Associates, and I was previously a Maryland Assistant State Superintendent. I've worked for every state superintendent from Nancy Grasmick to the previous state superintendent, so I'm very familiar with the blueprint. And Policy Studies Associates, we serve as the one of the strategy leads for the Technical Assistance Grant Program. So the purpose of today's presentation is to provide an overview of the support that is provided to school systems and the CTE committee through this grant program. And this grant, it really provides that targeted and customized support to meet the unique needs of our school systems as they implement the blueprint requirements. This is the second year of the grant, and when you look at this timeline, it provides a high-level overview of the grant process and how the AIB really works to ensure that, that they select the right strategic partners, and that the school systems and the CTE committee, that they have some agency in selecting the partners that they work with, and that that there's a collaborative process to develop project plans, and the AIB approves these project plans before work begins. And so it is through this grant that the AIB pays for services from strategic facilitators, strategy leads, and strategic partners. This is provided at no cost to the school systems and the CTE committee. And with strategic facilitators, and you see a picture on the screen of strategic facilitators that are supporting school systems and the CTE committee. They are the strategic facilitators. They look more holistically at the blueprint, and they work with school systems to help to incorporate the blueprint pillars across the school system as a whole to really systematize the implementation of the blueprint. And then you have strategy leads and strategic partners, whereas though they focus on specific blueprint objectives. And so on the screen, you can see the logos of the organizations that are supporting specific blueprint objectives. All 24 school systems and the CTE committee, they have access to this support. And what's listed on the screen now, you'll see that we have 20 school systems that are currently working with a strategic partner specifically focused on resource allocation. And so listed below in the table are all the school systems that are working with one of the strategic partners around resource allocation. There are 18 school systems and the CTE committee that are collaborating with a strategic facilitator, working on multiple pillars and working to really incorporate the blueprint across the school system. And you can see those school systems listed on in that table. And then there are monthly community of practice meetings that are facilitated by a strategic partner that all 24 school systems can participate in. And we have some of these community of practice sessions will have upwards of 90 participants from school system staff from across all 24 school systems. And they're focused on one of the topics displayed on the screen. And so an example of the support that's provided by a strategic facilitator. So I'm displaying on the screen now an example from Carroll County Public Schools, where they are working with their strategic facilitator on a teacher induction program. And they are working in partnership with Towson University, and they have their strategic facilitator. And you can see what the strategic facilitator is supporting the school system with. So they're looking at some of the foundational components of establishing this induction program, such as defining those roles and responsibilities of that school system's induction team. Looking at the master schedule to ensure that that mentoring and support is strategically included into the master schedule. They're also looking at developing and implementing those key elements to make that induction program successful, such as the roles and responsibilities of mentors, the frequency of the new teacher training, what are the structures and the expectations and the process for school administrators and mentors to align support. And so this is the kind of deep work that's happening with strategic facilitators in partnership with the school system. Another example is occurring in Prince George's County Public Schools. This is, they're working with a strategic facilitator around career counseling. And what the strategic facilitator is doing in this example is she's working with all the different partners. So the school system, the community college, the workforce board, to implement all the different parts that's necessary for career counseling. So you're looking at that memorandum of understanding, the meetings that need to occur to ensure that everyone is on the same page. Coordinating all that support from the state agencies to ensure that career counseling is occurring as intended by the blueprint. So strategic facilitators are doing some really deep work in the school systems, and there's tons of examples like this from every school system that's engaged in this work. And so this is just a high-level overview of the different pillars that strategic facilitators are working in across different school systems. In some areas, you'll see multiple pillars that are being worked in across different school systems. So you'll see, like in Talbot, you'll see high quality teachers for Pillar 2. And then you'll also see that there's projects with college and career readiness and in the governance and accountability. We have a lot of school systems that are working on strategic planning and ensuring that the blueprint is purposefully incorporated as a part of the overarching strategic planning for the school system. You have just a lot of great work happening with these strategic facilitators across all the pillars. And so Policy Studies Associates, we facilitated, we administered a mid-year survey to provide the opportunity for blueprint coordinators and strategic facilitators to share their experience with the implementation of this technical assistance grant program. And our survey questions focused on the perceptions of the support received, what's working well, what can be improved, and support that they would need for next year. And so what you're seeing on the screen is a snapshot of survey results. And so one of the things that the AIB, one of the things that they do is that they provide capacity building support to strategic facilitators to help strategic facilitators perform their duties in their role as strategic facilitators. And so so on the survey, strategic facilitators, they were asked, did they receive sufficient support from the AIB to perform their strategic facilitation duties? And most of the strategic facilitators responded that they strongly agree that the AIB has been helpful in providing them the support that they need to go out and then support the school systems. When we asked blueprint coordinators, how did they perceive the support that strategic facilitators were giving them? Did they view this as helpful toward meeting the objectives outlined in the Blueprint for Maryland's Future? Most of the blueprint coordinators, once again, strongly agree or agreed that this work and having that support of strategic facilitators have been very helpful. They even commented, and I'll show some of the comments, regarding of what worked well with the technical assistance grant program. And I put in bold where there was alignment in responses. They really liked the blueprint coordinators in particular being able to pick from that vetted list of facilitators. So the AIB did a really good job of interviewing and making sure that they identified people who truly understood the blueprint and had deep expertise in specific areas. The blueprint coordinators really enjoyed having the opportunity to have someone who was outside of their school district to have that neutral review of their work. And this also came up in the strategic facilitator responses, just having that outside perspective from on the blueprint requirements and being able to look holistically at everything that was happening in the school system and how to really look at how to optimize how to optimize all the resources that were being used to really maximize the impact of the blueprint. And so these were just some of the things that blueprint coordinators and strategic facilitators identified as what's working well with this technical assistance grant program. And then when we asked if there was interest in continuing strategic facilitator support, so if there was additional grant funding that became available, most of the strategic facilitators said yes, they would be interested in continuing as a strategic facilitator. And for the few that said no, it's because they are retiring and they are not working anymore. So that was the only reason why we got a no from strategic facilitators. And for blueprint coordinators, once again, most of them said yes, they would be interested in continuing to work with a strategic facilitator. And then the few that said maybe, it was all around the timing. They wanted to know now whether or not they would have a strategic facilitator. They didn't want to already be into the next school year to find out that this opportunity would be available. And when we put out the question, what support from the AIB would be most helpful to support Blueprint implementation next school year? Once again, I put in bold where there was some alignment between the responses of strategic facilitators and Blueprint coordinators. The timeline was that came up over and over again, where Blueprint coordinators expressed the need. They wanted to know what would be required as soon as possible, really as early as by the end of May 2025, what would be required for next school year. And then they wanted information and guidance as soon as possible, that when they receive things that are just in time, sometime it's too late because they're already in their planning process for the upcoming school year. The career ladder kept coming up and just having more guidance and information around the career ladder. And then you could see some of the other bullet points that came up that would be helpful to support Blueprint implementation next year. And so this current phase of the Technical Assistance Grant Program, it goes until June of this year. And overall, from when we look at all of the results from our mid-year survey, the support that the AIB has provided through this technical assistance grant has been well received. And I will turn it over to Rachel to see if there's any closing remarks or any additional things that you would like to add about this technical assistance grant.
Tira, we just really want to thank you and then also recognize your role as a strategy lead with our strategic facilitators, but also with our counties, the expertise that you've provided. And then also to mention earlier with career counseling, we shared about evidence of cross-county collaborations with Latifah's support in working with 8 of our counties. There's another example of that in our southern region, which has just been really neat to see how the great ideas and the collaborations are crossing across county lines. And so they've been working really hard for 2 years on Pillar 2 and looking at some challenges that they have with recruiting teachers and with the absence of some teacher prep programs down in that region, and working with University of Maryland with the expertise of our partner Amy from NCEE to help build that. And it's been really powerful work that's happened as a result of this grant and the fabulous folks that we've been able to partner with as strategic facilitators, leads, and partners. So Tiara, thank you very much, and thank you for the updates.
Thank you.
Let's see,
Anything
2
else
questions.
High school, go into questions.
Rachel,
Rachel, you're on mute.
Of course. Sorry about that. I just wanted to add that we are planning to, so the survey that Policy Studies did on AIB's behalf was of strategic facilitators specifically. We are next going to be doing a survey of the our other strategic partners who are new to phase 2. And we'll be doing that in the next month and sharing the results of that survey with you all as well.
Okay.
I see Dr. Stapleton.
Yeah, I think I beat member Robinson by like half of a second, but so wonderful. I love when folks evaluate programs or processes, so fabulous. I just had a few questions about, and I'm sorry if I missed this. Did we get responses from all of the strategic facilitators and from all of the Blueprint coordinators?
And so we got responses. So we did not get responses from all of the strategic facilitators. We got responses from about 87% of the strategic facilitators. The survey was open for 3 weeks, and we got responses from about 67 of the Blueprint coordinators. 67% of the Blueprint coordinators. However, when you look at the number, when you break that out by the number of Blueprint coordinators that are working with a strategic facilitator, that number then goes up to 83% of the Blueprint coordinators who are working with the strategic facilitator.
So there, when we do surveys of large populations or large samples, we just use the aggregate and say, all right, X%. I'm a little worried about a couple things and just wondered if there's follow-up, and this is really a question probably for Rachel A. Then, so 12% of the blueprint coordinators who responded indicated that they disagreed and strongly disagreed that there was not helpful. So I'd love to find out, are we following up on that and working with those LEAs? And then also one of the strategic facilitators indicated that they needed help, or some of the strategic facilitators indicated that they needed help with strategic planning, stakeholder engagement, report writing, policy development. I thought that this was what they were identified for. So it makes me a little bit worried. But I'll stop asking questions and let you comment.
And so the blueprint coordinator that identified that that they disagreed or didn't that disagreed or strongly disagreed, we do have their comments, and that was grounded in that they felt like there was nothing new added, that it confirmed what their district was already doing. And so so that was one school district. We know which school district that was. And they just felt like it was just, they appreciated the person, but they just felt like there was no new information that person brought to them. So that was the one school district that said that. And then with the strategic planning and that one comment, so what that strategic facilitator was focused on, that's what they are helping the school district with, and they feel like that more of that is going to be needed moving forward. That's going to be something ongoing and continuous.
So that was a need that they were reporting,
right,
of the school district, not of their own skill set.
Yes,
That's what I was reading it as, their skill set.
Yes.
Okay.
And I will just add, Rachel Amsted's, apparently the power has gone out. So she will rejoin us as soon as she can. Member Robinson?
Sure. Actually, Member Stapleton asked my question. I kind of just wanted to know if there was follow-up with the other with the people who disagreed. Because obviously like the percentages agreeing was great, but I'm just curious just how we can kind of like improve moving forward. Because I was wondering, because if this is the mid-year, if there might be another, like a chance to kind of tweak things or do anything differently to kind of improve for the rest of the time that you're with those people. But thank you for your response. That was helpful. And then the second thing I was going to say, I think Rachel Amstutz had just kind of said it at the end. I think one of the great things is like it's not just an expert kind of giving like their experiences or their expertise, but what I've like in just hearing some of the conversations in the different community of practice like conversations, I think it's been great just to hear other districts have the forum to kind of collaborate and talk to each other. And so I think that's been very powerful too. Like I guess creating the opportunity and the space for those conversations because just one district might just experiment with something, try something, and then it's helpful for someone else to hear it. And it's not always just that someone's coming in and giving them information. It's also providing the space for them to have those conversations with a little guidance. But I think that's been pretty powerful too. And so I commend the work that's been done by the different strategic facilitators because it's been pretty interesting just from a Pillar 2 perspective, how I've been engaging with it. So thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to add that another thing that we did last year that we're planning to do again this year is we met with the teams with each LEAs. So we met with the LEA, the strategic facilitator. Well, the order varied, but we met independently with the strategic facilitator. We met with the strategic facilitator and the blueprint coordinator and others from the LEA. And then we met separately with the LEA folks. So we tried to get the perspective of each partner and the shared perspective. But we also met separately with them so they had an opportunity to give feedback, not in front of each other. And that was very helpful. And we're planning to do that again. And then the only other thing I wanted to add is, I know some of the request is particularly around the timing of when they will know if the grants will be available and the timeline for that. That unfortunately is not within our control because it is subject to the budget the budget process. And so we wish that we could, we wish that we could speed it up, but it's unfortunately not something that we have control over at this point. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we appreciate it, and we are, if we are able to provide grants again, we are thinking about potentially timing it to be more multi-year, so that it's not an annual, at the end of the school year process. Because one thing we also have heard is that summer is is their prime time to really for planning and for doing some of this more deep thinking. And unfortunately, because of the timing of the end of the school year and the end of the fiscal year, it is not lining up with the timeline for the grants. So that's something that we're going to try to, if we're able to provide more grants, try to address that. Dr. Kerwin?
Yes. One thing that I noticed that the coordinators wanted was, better information about reports and so on and so forth. I just wondered if maybe you already do this, but would it be useful at the start of the year to send out a calendar with dates for when reports would be due, so that they had a master list?
They do have that.
Okay, good. I assumed they did, but I thought if they didn't, it was worth mentioning. Yeah.
It's more about, and Tara, feel free to, if you want to add to this, but it's more about either a template for what needs to be submitted, or more guidance around what they will need to submit, not so much the date. Okay. Dr. Doss?
Thank you. Can you clarify, there is a response from the from the Blueprint coordinators about if the school system has ownership of developing the area of need and focus, then yes, they would be interested in participating again. I thought that, and I could be totally wrong, but I thought that they did have some ownership of that, and that they had input on what needs and what focus and direction they wanted to go in. But can you clarify?
They do. They don't want that to change. So
Okay,
they want to stay the same. So what that Blueprint coordinator was saying, that if they change the way that the strategic facilitation, the way that process is done, then no, they don't want it. But right now, the way that it's done by the AIB, where there's this vetting process, and then the LEA gets to select. So the AIB isn't assigning anything to them; they're getting to select. That's what they want to continue. But if they change that, they don't want it.
Okay, all right. Thanks for that clarification.
Okay, any further questions, comments? Thank you for the presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right.
Ms. Heiss, it's now 3:30. We are going to take a motion to move into executive session, but that will not happen until 4. So we'll have approximately half an hour break, I would imagine, here.
Can I
Sure.
Can I clarify there?
Sure.
So we're going to have a motion to go into closed session, which Ms. Detterer is going to read. And then you can, I imagine we might want to take a 5 or a 10-minute break. But then we're going to come back into public session. Well, the original plan was to come into public session at 4 o'clock. We can adjust that time if you think we need a little more time in closed session. But the plan was to come back to the public session at 4 o'clock. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll go into private session, and then come back at 4 o'clock into public session.
Public. Okay.
Ms. Please read the motion for us.
Absolutely. For its next agenda item, the board expects to receive legal advice discuss its FY26 budget request, and to consider a real property lease for a public purpose. The motion is to go into an executive session.
Yes. I so move. All those in favor?
I'll second it.
Second, I'm sorry. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All right, we're going to take 5 minutes and we'll go into closed session. Miss Heiss, my link is not working for the closed session piece here. So maybe you'll send it back to me again to double check it, because when I went on, it was an error indicating that, yeah.
I probably just need to open it and we'll get you right in.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right.
What time are we coming into closed session?
5-minute break.
Okay.
And go ahead and leave this meeting. And,
Yeah.
and then
the link to the closed session is in the agenda?
in the member agenda.
Yeah.
It's a Google link.
Alrighty.
Okay, see you there.
Rachel, are we good to let the guests in who are presenting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And can we also make sure they have, or are they, hi, David.
Can you see me on here?
Yes, we see you, Mr. Chair. Yep.
Yes, I was going to ask if we could give permission to Kayla to share her screen for the presentation.
We have it set for anybody to share, so everybody should have access.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Hi, everybody.
No, we're not live streaming yet, correct? Or not correct?
Yes, we're still live.
Okay, that's what okay. So we do not, let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we're the vice chair has not joined yet. Mr. Manco has had another meeting, so he's not going to be able to join.
Just let me know when I should start sharing. Oh, we're waiting on one person.
Correct. Yes.
That's right. Okay.
I'm going to turn it over to you and introduce our guest, Rachel.
Yes. Yes. Should we go at, I'm just trying to text the vice chair, but we can go ahead and start, I think. So, so we're now back into public session, returning from closed session, and we have a quorum. We have 5 members present, Chair Leggett and members Doss, Stapleton, Lynch. I thought I saw, and Robinson. I did. Okay. And perfect timing, Vice Chair Kerwin. Okay. So, we're really pleased to have this presentation from Dr. David Blazer and his associate, his colleague from the University of Maryland, College Park, who we have been working with, the AIB has been working with through our MOU with the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center to do a deeper dives into the LEA implementation plans and really identify the most promising practices, both through what they're doing and what the research tells us are promising practices. And in this case, it's very timely with some of the conversations that are happening around teacher recruitment and retention, because the first focus of the work was on Pillar 2. And so with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Blazer, and I'm not sure if it is Dr. Bill or almost Dr. Bill.
As of May 2023, Dr. Bill, but you can call me
Kayla. Wonderful.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone. My name is Kayla Bill. I'm a postdoctoral research associate in the College of Education at the University of Maryland, College Park. I also work with the Maryland Equity Project and David Blazer, who is here with us. So David, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having us. I'm David Blazer. I'm an associate professor at the University of Maryland, College Park. I'm a former classroom teacher, and a lot of my research, most of my research focuses on questions related to teachers and teaching. And over the past couple of years, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how we can support more individuals of color and Black individuals in particular to enter public school systems, particularly in Maryland. So was excited to have this opportunity to collaborate with the AIB and to work with the work on kind of timely policy under the blueprint to take kind of what we know from the literature, from our research, pair with kind of what we're seeing from districts to hopefully kind of guide future directions for the AIB and under the blueprint. Kayla is going to lead the charge today with the presentation, but I'll chime in as needed and certainly kind of here once we turn to Q&A period.
Thanks, David. So yeah, as mentioned, we've been engaging in a lot of different work over the last several months, but our focus has been
on recruiting diverse teachers and leaders. So that's what I'm going to focus on today, particularly challenges and strategies in this area. So just a brief overview of where we're headed with this presentation. I'm going to start with a brief overview of the academic literature, and then turn to an overview of our research process. Then I'll move to findings, focusing on challenges with and strategies for diversifying teacher workforces, and then turning to leader workforces, and then close with what we see as some potential future directions for the AIB, as well as our next steps as a research team. In terms of the academic literature, most research focuses on challenges with diversifying the teacher workforce specifically. And a lot of this research identifies factors that are driving this overarching challenge of a limited pool of prospective teachers of color. And these factors include disparities in educational attainment, declining interest in teaching, bias in teacher certification exams and hiring processes, and disparities in retention. A smaller body of work focuses on some promising strategies to diversify. We define those promising strategies as those that aim to address challenges that I identified on the previous slide. So some of these promising strategies include grow your own programs that are focused on expanding the recruitment pool, financial incentives and supports, alternative certification pathways, hiring and retention practices that aim to mitigate bias. One thing that we want to note about this literature on promising strategies is that it's primarily qualitative and small in scope, and many of these strategies have not yet been tested using causal methods or other quantitative methods. And that to us is one indicator that we have a lot left to learn about what can help us to effectively achieve these really important and interrelated goals of diversifying teacher and leader workforces. The literature that I just shared with you has played a really big role in grounding our research process for this work. And our process involved multiple stages, including developing a coding tool that was designed to capture information about diversification challenges and strategies, using that tool to analyze relevant portions of district's 2024 implementation plans, and reviewing those data to identify themes and patterns across districts. So for example, common challenges with recruiting diverse teachers. In this last phase of our analysis, we paid particular attention to how districts' challenges and strategies aligned with the academic literature I shared, as well as alignment between the strategies districts were using and the challenges that they themselves were speaking about or writing about. And I'm going to come back to this idea of alignment later in the presentation.
Kayla, I just want to let you know your sound's a little off, so it might be helpful to turn off the your video. I'm not sure, but it's just a little there's some echoing. It might be just me, but I think that yeah, just wanted to let you know.
Thank you, Emma. Are other folks having trouble hearing me as well?
I saw a couple people nod.
Yeah, it's just like a little fuzzy or something. I don't know, but maybe try turning your camera off.
Okay, let me try. I've turned my camera off, and hopefully that will work. But
Still a little
please,
choppy.
You said still a little choppy?
Yeah, maybe even got worse.
Oh no.
We can hear you. It's just there's a rumble that comes in and out periodically. But it's okay. We can hear you.
Okay. Well, please jump in if there's anything that I can repeat. And David, if there's anything to clarify.
I will.
Okay, so turning now to findings, I want to start with challenges within strategies for diversifying teacher workforces, beginning with the headline. And the headline here is that there are some promising examples of districts engaging in teacher workforce diversification strategies that are aiming to address the challenges either identified in the academic literature or that they identified in their own context. And at the heart of these promising strategies is the goal of expanding the teacher candidate pool from which those districts can recruit. More frequently, though, districts described employing strategies that had a less clear connection to challenges, in that they were focused on drawing in candidates from what they even acknowledged was a limited and shrinking existing pool. Okay, so now let's dive a little bit more in depth into the findings, starting with challenges. So generally, districts echoed and extended the challenges identified in the academic literature. And the most common challenges were a limited pool of teacher candidates, financial constraints, and certification requirements. The vast majority of districts, 21 of 24, mentioned some type of challenges with recruiting a diverse group of teachers in their implementation plans. And the most commonly cited challenge was a limited pool of teacher candidates of color. We also have some qualitative examples of challenges to further illustrate how districts were talking about them. So I want to pause for just a few moments to give you a second to read through these. Okay. And sound check. Is the sound any better? No, I saw your head.
It's about the same, but we can hear you.
Okay. Okay. I'll try to talk slowly and clearly. Okay. So moving on to strategies to diversify, we identified 6 main categories of strategies that districts described using to diversify their teacher workforces. And the most popular strategies were grow your own programs and partnerships, including those with IHEs and community organizations. And another sort of high-level takeaway from our work in this area is that these various strategies targeted 8 different pools of teacher candidates, most frequently high schoolers and paraeducators and instructional assistants. And these 2 or 3 main groups were generally targeted through grow your own programs. Okay, so I mentioned when explaining our sort of analytic process that we paid particular attention to whether and how district strategies aligned with the challenges and strategies identified in the academic literature, as well as the challenges that districts themselves were identifying. And a key takeaway from our analysis is that there was a lot of variation in alignment, both across and within the 6 different categories of strategies that I just shared with you. That variation in alignment led us to categorize examples of strategies from districts on a continuum from most to least promising. On the higher end of the continuum, in the most promising category, are examples of strategies that aligned with challenges, again, either identified in the academic literature or by districts or both, and that also provided details about how a particular strategy aligned with one or more challenges. In this middle category, which we call potentially promising, are examples of strategies that did align with challenges, but didn't really provide a lot of detail about the quote unquote how. And in this final category on the lower end of the continuum, which we call least promising, were examples of strategies that simply did not align with any of those challenges. So to make that a little more concrete, I want to walk you briefly through an example. And this example is focused on the broader strategy of modifying hiring practices. So I want to give you a few moments just to skim through these examples from 3 different districts of their efforts to modify hiring practices, and then I'll walk you through it. Okay, so in the most and potentially promising category, we have examples from districts A and B. And these examples fell in these categories because they were aligned with a challenge identified in the literature of bias in the hiring process. And where these two examples diverge is in the amount of detail they provide about that particular strategy and its alignment with the challenges. So District A provides a lot more detail about how their modified hiring practices are combating bias relative to District B. And in this last category, we have an example from District C that's categorized as least promising simply because it's not focused on addressing bias in the hiring process. So keeping that framework in mind, this table shows the number of districts engaging in most potentially and least promising strategies organized into those 6 different categories of strategies I shared with you earlier. And I want to highlight a few different takeaways from this table. First is that most promising strategies were least common, while potentially promising strategies were most common. And second is that there's a lot of variation in degrees of promise, both across and within different categories. So for example, Grow Your Own programs, examples of this strategy all fell within most or potentially promising categories because they all sought to expand the recruitment pool. While examples of this marketing strategy all fell into the least promising category because they were all focused on drawing in candidates from a limited and shrinking pool, which is a challenge that districts themselves recognized. And in our appendix of this presentation, we have many slides that detail qualitative examples from each of these strategies. Okay, the final kind of piece of our findings is about leader workforces. And the highlight here, or the headline here, is that district implementation plans provided much less information about challenges with and strategies for diversifying leader workforces. But our takeaway, even from that limited data, is aligned with our other findings from this analysis, that district strategies to diversify their leader workforces are largely focused on drawing from a limited existing pool of candidates rather than trying to expand that pool. Key challenges with diversifying leader workforces included limited teacher diversity, financial constraints, and professional advancement pathways that several districts talked about as being in competition with one another. And here again, we have some qualitative excerpts that illustrate these challenges. So I'll give you a few moments to look through those. District strategies to diversify leader workforces were generally very similar to the strategies they were using to diversify their teacher workforces. The only exception was professional learning opportunities. And also similar was the key takeaway here that most promising strategies were the least common. And again, we have some qualitative examples of strategies in each of these categories in the appendix of this presentation. So to wrap up, I want to highlight what we see as some potential future directions from this work for the AIB, as well as our next steps as a research team. So first, for future directions, we think it could be important for the board to commission studies of whether most and potentially promising strategies are actually facilitating progress toward diversification goals. Second, the board could consider different ways to learn more detailed information about districts' diversification strategies and also kind of push them to think about whether those strategies are worth continued investment in. And this could involve requiring districts to provide more information about how their strategies align with challenges, how successful their strategies have been in prior years, and how they'll measure progress moving forward. And could also involve potentially requiring comprehensive diversification plans that are similar to the comprehensive literacy plans. At the same time, we also want to kind of lift up the idea that shifting teacher and leader demographics is a really long-term goal. However, the AIB can request and collect data on shorter term measures that sort of help us see progress, both district specific and statewide, toward that long-term goal. And those short-term measures could include enrollment in promising high school pathway programs like the Teacher Academy of Maryland and Educators Rising, the schools at which TAM and Educators Rising are offered, which speaks to which students have access to those programs, and the locations at which different recruitment events are held. And finally, thinking sort of big picture, it's important to recognize that recruiting teachers and leaders of color is one important step of the really big puzzle of diversifying these two workforces. So the board could also consider to develop more comprehensive strategies for and plans around retaining teachers and leaders of color, particularly given that districts are relying or appear to be relying on teacher workforces to diversify their leader workforces. Our next steps as a research team, we have several in progress. First, and directly related to that last point I just made about teacher and leader retention, is that we have an ongoing analysis of how districts are trying to retain teachers and leaders of color. And we have some preliminary takeaways that we'd be happy to share with you in our conversation if that's of interest. We're also continuing to work in a different pillar area, or in a different pillar and topic area, continuing our analysis of districts' challenges with and strategies for partnering with providers to expand pre-K access. And once we wrap up those two works in progress, we'll turn to other topic areas that AIB staff have identified as priorities, including community schools, high dosage tutoring, and college and career readiness support program. And that is all I have. So I will stop sharing.
You're on mute, Mr. Chair.
You're on
Right,
mute.
can you hear me?
Yeah,
All right, go
now
ahead.
we can.
Go ahead, Britt.
No. I was just going to say you were on mute.
Yeah, let me go back, because I think the question that I have is one of the ever shrinking pool. I was at a board meeting last week, University of Maryland, and they provided a snapshot of all of the colleges within the University of Maryland College Park. And as I recall, all of them showed increased enrollment in the various schools across the board. And there were two that were either flat or going down. And in education, it was flat, simply flat. And I think the number is around 500 or so. And I asked the question, generally of the entire system, what is the capacity, reasonable capacity? And the response was that they had capacity in the system overall. But there were some questions about whether they wanted to utilize all of the capacity to ensure that they could accommodate that in terms of the quality they wanted, but in terms of actual space and the teacher cohort that they had at this point in time, they had additional capacity. And so if our major flagship university is not growing those numbers, and we have challenges around the system, and it goes back to the question you raised, the point you made earlier. To me, if they're not in the pipeline, no matter how well you seek to recruit, unless you're starting very early, it's a limited impact, positive impact that you're going to have on this. Am I reading this wrong? Please help me here.
I'll chime in. as somebody who thinks a lot about teacher education at College Park as well as at other institutions. Um, so, I mean, I think you made a couple of points that I think are really important. So one is, recruiting early or kind of thinking about who it is that we're engaging. And I think we have a lot of descriptive and kind of other evidence in Maryland and elsewhere that starting as early as possible is critical. So, myself and some colleagues kind of have done some work looking at the effects of the Teacher Academy of Maryland program, where we find that exposure to that program in high school has pretty large returns on the likelihood that individuals, and particularly Black females, go into teaching many years later. So engaging with students early as possible is like a critical way to expand the existing candidate pool, right? Not just thinking about who already exists and who has been credentialed as a teacher, but who could we potentially support to enter the pool or enter or consider teaching as a profession in high school. Second is, I know that College Park, like other institutions, are thinking about many things that they need to do to shift gears away from kind of what's been happening for many decades around teacher education, and kind of thinking about ways to re-engage folks who may very well have an interest in teaching or could be supported to do so with kind of novel programming. So, I know a big topic of the board and certainly of conversation at College Park is programming to support conditionally certified teachers. That is where the majority of individuals of color are entering teaching in the state of Maryland, as well as kind of opportunities through residency programs.
Thank you. Are there any ideas or suggestions on the Grow Your Own that may be tied to the change in federal workforce potentially as a source?
Can you say that? I mean, can you repeat?
Let me put it directly. One way or the other, it may turn out that there may be larger numbers of people leaving the federal workforce, either intentionally or unintentionally. Are there any ideas or suggestions in terms of growing your own that may be marketing to those people who may look for a different career more directly?
So one, to Kayla's point early in the presentation, I think, we talk a lot about promising strategies in literature and thinking about expanding pools by engaging with folks who are not already in kind of undergraduate or graduate level teacher education is like the key thing we all need to do. And so that makes a lot of sense. We don't have much evidence, particularly causal evidence, on the extent to which some programs do or do not work. So, I think with the exception of some of the work we're doing around TAM, which says that engaging students in high school does seem to have kind of returns 10 years later. Some things we at least see descriptively in Maryland is that there are an increasing number of aides and paraeducators in Maryland over the past decade who are moving into full-time teaching positions. It's about our paraeducator pool has a lot of individuals of color, and the individuals of color are moving from aides into teaching positions at high rates. So that's a potential opportunity to bring in individuals into teaching as well as individuals of color specifically. I'm not sure I'm aware of like existing programming on kind of grow your own. That's the kind of thinking specifically around the kind of federal workforce. That's, a really new kind of idea and challenge, but certainly it's kind of worth exploring.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, there are several hands. Member Robbins.
Oh, excuse me. Hello. Thank you for all that you both have shared. This is as a teacher, this is very near and dear to my heart. This particular research, it's topic of my doctoral research too, actually. So I guess the question that I have, I hope the rest of the board doesn't get sick of me hearing saying this, but the declining interest in the teaching profession is like a very important concept or idea to me. So I'm glad that that was kind of highlighted in as one of the reasons why there might be why there's a challenge. But I guess my question is, and I'm not sure if you can answer this from the implementation plan analysis or just in leadership or academic literature. Um, what are the primary reasons for the declining interest in the teaching? Or is there any consensus in the academic literature or in maybe in the implementation plan analysis where people kind of dug deeper and not just saying that people aren't interested in teaching, but like what's the reason for where maybe a high school student might have said or or undergraduates, why are they saying they're not interested?
Kayla, did you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, I can tag team this one. For like the last few years, I've collaborated with Jennifer Rice and others on a mixed methods project to understand undergraduate students at the University of Maryland specifically, how they're interested in teaching, what they think about a career in teaching. So I'm a little bit familiar with some of the studies on undergraduate students' interest in teaching, and there's not a ton, but I think a lot of it generally suggests that like the ability to make a social contribution to teaching or through teaching is something that excites students about the career. But there are a lot of pieces of evidence about like different working conditions of a teaching profession that are particularly salient for students of color. There's some research on Black male students specifically that like the conditions of the teaching profession are dissuading them from the career despite their interest in potentially making a contribution or serving as a role model. So I think it's certainly multifaceted.
And I'll just add that I think we've all know from personal experiences or conversations we've had about, and we can list off a number of different reasons, starting first with the fact that school systems aren't always welcoming in spaces for individuals of color, such that becoming a teacher seems like a hard decision to make. But add to that, the financial considerations, being able to see kind of teachers as like excited about their work and kind of thinking about them as role models to pursue that work. I think there are a number of them that the literature suggests. My sense of the literature, though, is that we don't have a systematic understanding about what all of those perceptions and factors are, and particularly amongst students and families of color. So something that Kayla, myself, and some of our colleagues are exploring, and we'd love to do in collaboration or kind of with many of you here, is engaging this systematically, right? Through a set of, whether it's a statewide survey or a broad set of focus groups, understanding the set of perceptions and factors around why individuals are or are not choosing teaching, because anything one does to intervene or needs to address those specifically.
Thank you. I mean, that's what you just said about the survey was something I think I mentioned at a previous meeting. So I really definitely agree with that. And in addition, a lot of the other factors that you raised kind of, I haven't done the deep like academic research into it, but it definitely coincides with my experiences and the conversations that I've had like anecdotally. So I appreciate you sharing that. I guess moving forward, I would have hoped to have seen an acknowledgement of some of that kind of thought process that you shared, like maybe from the LEAs or from, I guess I want to get at the root cause of why people don't want to be teaching, why people don't want to be teachers. And I feel like it feels that saying grow your own programs as like a thing, it feels like that's like that's a great thing to say. And I support that, of course, but I think we're leaving a lot on the table in terms of just people don't want to be teachers because people have been in schools. And I think we never really addressed that part. Like students have been in schools. Students have been in schools and they don't want to go back to them. Students don't want to go back to the schools because of how the schools over rely on testing or how because discipline problems run amok. Like there are issues in schools that we're not addressing. And so I kind of want us to lean into those conversations, uncomfortable as they may be, but just I want us to talk about that because I think that's where we're going to get a real change in our teacher pipeline. I'm a teacher in Prince George's County Public Schools, so obviously when we talk about like diversifying the teaching force, like you have 9,000 or 10,000 graduates in Prince George's County Public Schools, and the vast majority are Black and Brown students. And so I wonder if there are things that we can do to make schools better. And I'd be interested in any literature you might have that you could kind of send me offline or whatever about some of those perceptions and things that you may have worked on in the past, just to kind of begin thinking about this more systematically, like you said, because I don't think that we're doing that necessarily. I think what I hear, not from you necessarily, but just from districts and from different partners across the state is, oh, well, let's do grow your own programs. Like there's a sense of things that we know are good to say, but I don't feel that we're addressing the root cause of why people don't want to be teachers. So.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add to this. No, I think that's exactly the point, right? Is that we are kind of designing programs that may or may not, like, aren't first starting with the critical question of why do people not choose teaching? And specifically, why do Black and brown kids and their families and maybe their teachers dissuade them from going into teaching? It requires systematic exploration and like really engaging with a broad group of Black and brown students, families, and teachers. This is work where, myself and Kayla, Keisha Allen, Ebony Terrell Shockley, Mega Comstock, and some others are kind of working on. We're hosting a convening next week where we're trying to bring together students, teachers, teacher educators, community advocacy organizations to start some of those conversations. So we're certainly agree with you entirely. There's a lot more work to be done in that area.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Kerwin?
Thank you for the presentation and the work you've done. You had these three categories of programs. The most what was the most promising practices? Was that the first most promising practice? Okay, so and you defined the criteria by which you gave it that name. My question is, is there any evidence that the most promising practices have done any better than the other in actually recruiting teachers?
No.
You don't. So
No.
you're just assuming these. I mean, it's logical what you said, but we don't have any evidence that that's doing anything better than any of the other practices.
Yeah, I'll say that with one exception, which is that this is a research base I spent a lot of time in. And so we just put out this study recently about the effects of the Teacher Academy in Maryland, which to my knowledge is kind of the first that's causal evidence on the benefits of a high school-based grow your own program, where we do see pretty significant effects on becoming a teacher. For Black women and white women. We also find positive effects on the earnings of Black women. We see about kind of a 18% wage boost. And we also see, some additional analysis of the data suggests kind of some of the factors that might be driving their decisions, kind of and thinking about the salaries and school context in which they're choosing. That is a pretty new evidence base, right? A lot of what we know in the literature to date is talking about very clearly stating promising practices,
right,
based on theory, based on logic. But most to date, almost all of them are untested in a causal framework.
All right. Secondly, you looked at the 24 districts in Maryland. Are you aware of any research that has looked at practices across the country where there has, they've actually produced results in this regard? I mean, is there any research that you're aware of that has identified truly promising practices elsewhere?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that, almost every state across the country is engaging in some
Struggling with the same problem.
GYO, right? Okay. Like they're dealing with the same challenge,
right?
Doing similar things like GYO programs, like the Teacher Academy of Maryland's not a new thing, right? South Carolina does it, Pennsylvania does it, school across the country. But no, I don't think anybody knows the answer.
Okay. Are you aware of the program at College Park called Terrapins Teach?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is an effort to get more teachers into STEM teaching. It is focused on STEM. It is modeled on, and it's been, I would say, at best, modestly successful. It has not, is not really, is not, there's nothing to, it's not, hasn't been a huge success. However, it's modeled on a program from University of Texas, Austin, that was unbelievably successful. And the basic strategy was that there were people went into entry level large lecture courses, talked about teaching as a career, explained to them that there was this program where you could sort of try it out and you get a little training and teaching, and you might even go work in some schools while you're a student, and et cetera, et cetera. And if you really like it, then you can move into and get a teaching certification when you graduate. That's the basic outline of the program. Now, that worked unbelievably well at UT Austin, producing science teachers. I'm just wondering if a strategy like that, now take away this, we need teachers in all areas, so take away the STEM, but think about recruiting students, when they're freshmen, by allowing them to get introduced to teaching as a career. So I just throw that out as something that I think could be worthy of thinking about. And then finally, where does the Teaching Academy of Maryland work? Where are the sites? Is it? I've heard of it, but I'm not that familiar with it.
I believe it's in 23 out of 24 school districts in the state. So it's all across the state, but it's not at all high schools, for sure. And the kind of where it is situated kind of evolved over time.
All right.
But I just want to speak to your point, a couple of points, or the point before about kind of this getting people, how do we get people interested? I think we're going kind of off the punches right now, but one thing I think, I was hearing recently at a conference as I was presenting some of the work around the Teacher Academy of Maryland, had some colleagues who were looking at kind of similar programs or a similar program in Texas, where they found like not as positive effects as kind of we had found, but they hypothesized by looking at their data that like which courses were offered to high school students really mattered. And it were the courses that were really allowing high school students to think about child development and engage kind of with kids were seemed to be kind of much more impactful than kind of the kind of a high school CTE program that was focused on kind of lesson planning.
Yeah.
So
very interesting point.
Right. It's not just like having a program, but it's how the program is structured.
Right.
And the really exciting and cool parts about teaching for all of us who have been teachers are like thinking about kids, engaging with kids.
And seeing that light bulb go off. Right.
Exactly.
My final comment or thought is, we've as part of the blueprint, we've just created a very significantly increased career counseling program that exposes kids starting in middle school to what possible careers they might want to pursue. And every kid gets individual counseling, and it goes from middle school through high school. So it seems to me that if we have the teacher, maybe there's some way of marrying the Teachers Academy of Maryland with these career counseling efforts, which now exist in every school, middle school and high school. So we need a focus in the career counseling on becoming a teacher, it seems to me, and that's something we should all think about how we could do that.
There are, to that point, and I don't remember them off the top of my head, there are some districts that have mentioned thinking about providing apprenticeships for students who are interested in teaching. So kind of doubling up on the goals for CTE and the goals for increasing and diversifying the teacher workforce. But I think those plans are sort of nascent ideas rather than in effect. But those were encouraging rumblings to see.
Sorry, Dr. Lynch.
Thank you. I just want to thank my fellow board members for all of their comments, because I think a lot of, as I was sitting here listening to the presentation, and I just have to say in full disclosure that Dr. Blazer and I have had conversations as early as just a week ago, sort of having some conversations around what are we doing in the teaching profession. And at the University of Maryland, we are working on talking about how we are attracting more people to the field as early as today about what we're doing to attract our federal workers to the field. So those are ongoing conversations about how we can continue to do that and how we can address conditionally certified teachers. And I think to that point, whether it's federal workers, whether it is college students who are currently enrolled in a different discipline, I do encourage us to continue to look for ways beyond a grow your own pipeline, which has traditionally been viewed as sort of a TAM to maybe apprenticeship into maybe an AAT into a traditional program, is that pipeline has existed forever. And I think to Member Robinson's point, like that the spigot is not expanding on that, so there is not more flow that is happening in those pathways. And so we will continue to have a lack of the volume that we need to address our major teacher shortage if our answer to the problem continues to be the same existing programs that we have had forever and ever. And so when we talk about grow your own, I do hope that we continue to think about what that may look like for students in college programs, in STEM fields, in business fields, and computer science or whatever it may be, who had not previously thought of teaching, and how are we engaging in that space? How are we engaging people who are looking to be career changers and really giving those opportunities for them to explore what teaching may be like? And so I hope that we can expand what we call Grow Your Own to include our communities, because our communities, whether they maybe are faith-based leaders, maybe those in our communities who may be interested in serving. We certainly have a federal workforce that is very interested in serving. We know this is what they've been doing, and who may be looking for careers. And I think sort of marrying with this idea around career development, we often hear that our teachers do not have the depth of content knowledge that directly aligns with current industry. And so I think we have this really unique opportunity to also think about grow your own in terms of how are we pulling from industries into teaching professions and then back out into our industry fields, so that we're really building stronger neural networks that allow for that content sort of sharing between industry and the K through 12 space. So I hope we continue to expand what Grow Your Own means in those ways. But I also do want to address that the governor's budget recently has proposed a significant amount of money for a marketing campaign to attract people to the teaching profession. And I think that is incredibly important. And I know it can sometimes seem to be like, well, what do you need a marketing campaign for? But what I will offer is that I think there is a strong narrative about the pain points of teaching as a profession that do not accurately reflect the real joy that the majority of our teachers feel, and the real sense of service and commitment and fulfillment that our teachers feel. And so, sometimes the squeaky wheel kind of gets a lot of attention. And I do think that having the opportunity for exceptional teachers and leaders like Member Robinson, like others who are doing this really hard work every day, to share that experience, and making sure that as we're doing it, that it is sort of tapping into every single community and what speaks in those communities. And I think your research has the opportunity to inform that campaign as to what we know about what are the perceptions of barriers, or what are the things that may be helpful to bring people to the field. So I also hope that as that campaign is being developed, that the research that you and your other colleagues at the University of Maryland are doing will be considered to help build a really strong campaign.
Yeah, I just want to echo that point. First, like that can be money very well spent, but could also be money that's not well spent if it doesn't go to Justin's point about like actually being targeted and like truly understanding why people aren't interested in the teaching profession in the first place. So, something we've talked about as a group and kind of I think where we're hoping to head next, we're submitting a grant proposal soon on this, would be to do um, some experimentation around both the content of what that marketing could be and its format, right? So is like the messages can vary, right? Is the messages that we need to understand and circulate information about the benefits of teaching, the financial and otherwise? Is it about seeing teachers who have incredible joy in the profession? Is it about the messages of around the degree of public service and kind of the extent to which that's beneficial? There are a number of different messages, but we also kind of need to know how to kind of package and frame them and in kind of what format, whether it be over social media or other, our networks. And those, the questions about what to message and how to message it are answerable through research. And that is exactly kind of what we're hoping to do and to put some grant proposals forward to explore.
Dr. Doss.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. That was good. Enjoyed just hearing all of that. Question, going back to the evaluation of the implementation plan, there was, again, you had the 3 columns, the most promising, potentially promising, and the least promising. And there was an example that just talked about hiring practices. And with the most promising, the respondent went into detail, a little bit more detail about how they were doing, avoided biases and so forth. And then the potentially promising did almost the same thing, but just with a little less detail. And then the least promising just said, well, we refined our interview practices. So I guess my question is that more of something that should be done with how we're asking for the information, or did you find some correlation between how that was answered as to how effective their strategies were?
The correlation piece, I think we can't speak to it at this time, but there was a lot of, detail was a key piece of criteria that kind of shaped our categorizing of different examples of strategies. So if districts didn't provide a lot of detail about a strategy, it was generally either potentially promising or least promising, depending on the practice and its alignment with challenges. But there was a lot of variation across districts and across portions of plan and how much detail they went into. And I think that's just a limitation of the type of data source that we kind of recognized as we embarked on this research. And that kind of is what drove or what contributed to some of our recommendations toward the end of the presentation about, thinking about asking districts specific questions, whether it's in the form of a written plan or, you have ideas for other ways to gather information, but that are getting at more specific pieces of their strategies. How are they measuring their strategies and their progress over time? What is driving their decision to use these strategies? What challenge is it addressing? So it's probably a little bit of both.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Mrs. Heiss?
There are no hands raised.
Okay. Thank you for a very enlightening conversation. I look forward to our ongoing discussion. This is a very serious matter for us because one of the objectives of the blueprint is to increase the diverse pool of teachers in order for us to reach many of the students that I think look to teachers as role models and an important element to join the workforce for us in the future. So thank you very much for your presentation, and we hope to follow up pretty soon with that. All right. Are there any other questions or concerns that we need to cover, Ms. Heiss, for the remainder of the day?
No, sir.
Thank you, and thank everyone for a very productive series of agenda items today. Look forward to our ongoing discussion. We'll come back and we'll put together a work group to put into place a number of items that we talked about today, and hopefully you'll be hearing from me. And anyone who wants to volunteer for that, let us know, but we'll get back to you pretty soon on that. Okay, I have the motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second it? Okay. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? Hearing none, we are so adjourned. Thank you.